I was supposed to marry into the Mafia until I learned the truth about my fiancé. Victor Voss slid the wedding invitation across the dinner table like it was a bill of sale. Sign it, he said, not to Adrian, to Elena's mother. Margaret Marlowe's hand shook so badly, the crystal wine glass nearly tipped. She hadn't spoken in 4 minutes. Elena had been counting. Victor hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't needed to. 2 men standing behind him near the door hadn't moved or spoken either. They didn't have to. Their presence said everything a man like Victor Voss needed said. "You'll have her at the church by 2 o'clock, Victor continued, cutting into his steak with the casual precision of a man who had never once in his life been told no. The photographer arrives at noon. We'll keep the guest list intimate. 300, perhaps 350. Elena sat across from him at her own mother's dining room table in her own mother's house and felt something cold and mechanical click into place inside her chest. Not fear exactly. Something older and quieter than fear. The recognition that she had walked into a room she did not yet understand how to walk out of. She had 3 days until the wedding. She didn't know yet that in 48 hours she would find the ring. If you've ever looked at someone you loved and suddenly realized you had no idea who they were, stay with me. Because this story is going to ask you something hard. It's going to ask what you would do when the truth arrives too late. When the man you planned to spend your life with turns out to be something you never agreed to, and when walking away might be the most dangerous thing you've ever done. This is that story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, Chicago, London, Sydney, Manila, Lagos, or anywhere in between, drop your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story travels. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't go anywhere. Because what happens to Elena Marlowe in the next few days will change everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the price of the truth. Let's begin. Elena Marlowe had not planned to fall in love with Adrian Voss. That was the thing she kept coming back to. In the hours after she found the ring, sitting alone in the bathroom of a hotel suite, with the door locked and the faucet running, so no one could hear her breathing too loud. She had not planned any of it. She had not walked into that fundraiser 14 months ago looking for a man. She had been there for the open bar and the opportunity to network for the nonprofit she ran, a small organization that helped women navigate domestic violence cases through the Chicago court system. She had been wearing shoes that were half a size too small and nursing a headache she'd had since Tuesday. Adrian had handed her a glass of water without her asking. Not champagne, water. With ice and a small slice of lemon, because apparently he'd watched her push away 2 glasses of champagne and drew his own conclusions. He hadn't introduced himself. He just handed her the glass and said, "You look like you're working harder than everyone else in this room." She'd said, "I'm always working harder than everyone else in this room." Smiled at that. Not the practiced, public-facing smile she'd later see him deploy at boardroom tables and charity galas. Something smaller than that, more private. She hadn't known who he was until 40 minutes later, when a woman from the mayor's office leaned over and whispered his name in her ear, with the reverence people usually reserve for inherited titles. Adrian Voss, Victor Voss's son. The woman had raised her eyebrows like that was supposed to mean something terrifying. And it did mean something. Elena wasn't naive. She had grown up in Chicago. She knew what the Voss name meant on the South Side, what it meant in certain courtrooms, what it meant when somebody's case mysteriously stalled or a witness recanted without explanation. But he'd given her a glass of water. He'd stayed another 2 hours. That was 14 months ago. Now there were save-the-date cards sitting in 350 envelopes, a Vera Wang dress in a garment bag in her apartment closet, and a ring on her left hand that cost more than her car. And Elena's was standing in front of a mirror in her mother's house, watching herself try to remember what it felt like to be certain. The study was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a hallway that smelled like old wood and something chemical underneath it, like cleaning fluid used too often in one spot. Adrian had shown her the house 6 months ago, shortly after they got engaged. A sprawling Victorian on the North Shore that had belonged to his grandfather, then passed to Victor, then to Adrian, when Victor decided the suburbs were beneath him and relocated to a penthouse downtown. Adrian had taken Elena through every room except this one. He'd said it was just storage, old furniture, nothing interesting. She had believed him. She had believed most things he told her. The door wasn't locked, which was the first thing that surprised her. She'd come upstairs looking for an outlet to charge her phone, found a door slightly ajar, pushed it open expecting boxes and old lamps, and stepped into a room that was clearly not storage. There was a desk, a real working desk, papers stacked with a kind of deliberate organization she recognized from Adrian's home office downtown. A laptop, a small lamp, and a shelf of books that had been read, spines cracked and pages dog-eared, not decorative. She would have backed out immediately. She would have charged her phone downstairs and never thought about it again. Except the bottom drawer of the desk was open an inch, and something inside it caught the light wrong. She should not have opened it further. She knew that even in the moment. But knowing you shouldn't do something and stopping yourself are two different skills, and Elena had never been particularly gifted at the second one. The ring was wrapped loosely in a folded piece of cloth, white cotton gone stiff and brown at the edges. A woman's ring. Simple gold band, no stone, the kind of ring a working woman wears because diamonds catch on things. Dark residue along the inner curve of the band, old and dried. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. Then her stomach dropped so fast she had to grab the edge of the desk. Blood. Old blood, dark and unmistakable once she recognized it. She stood very still for what felt like a long time. Then she saw the ledger. It was a composition notebook, the black and white marbled kind, sitting flat in the drawer beneath where the cloth had been. She almost didn't open it. She told herself, standing there with both hands gripping the edge of that drawer, that there were explanations, that people kept old things, that blood could come from anywhere, that she was projecting. She opened it. The handwriting inside was not Adrian's. She knew his handwriting from grocery lists left on her kitchen counter and post-it notes stuck to her coffee maker with instructions like press the right button, not the left one, trust me. This was older, more cramped, a different hand entirely. The ink in the first several pages had faded to gray. Dates, names. And beside each name a brief notation. 3 or 4 words, sometimes less. G. Rains. March 2009. Harbor D. Ferrara. November 2010. Resolved. Paul Marlowe. December 2011. Pending. Elena read the last name 3 times. Then she read it a 4th time. Because sometimes your brain refuses the first few attempts. Paul Marlowe. Her father. Her father who had died of a heart attack when Elena was 22, during her senior year of college. Her father whose death had been quiet and uncomplicated and medically documented. Her father, who she had buried in St. Casimir Cemetery on a gray November afternoon with 53 people in attendance and a priest who mispronounced his middle name. Father's name in a ledger in her fiancé's private study. With the word pending written next to it, she closed the notebook, put it back exactly where it had been. She rearranged the cloth over the ring, closed the drawer. Then she walked out of the room, closed the door behind her, went down the stairs, smiled at Adrian's housekeeper, who asked if she'd found what she was looking for, said yes, thank you, and walked outside to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for 6 minutes without starting the engine. Then she drove back to her apartment, poured herself a glass of water she did not drink, and started making a plan. The thing about Elena Marlowe that most people underestimated was her patience. She was not a calm person. She was not serene or composed, or any of the words people used to describe women who didn't yell when they were angry. She was angry right now, in a way that made her hands clench and her jaw ache. But anger in her experience was most useful when it was quiet. She had watched women in crisis at her organization for 6 years. She had watched them make decisions from panic and decisions from calculation. And she had watched which ones played out better. Panic was loud and visible and gave the other side a target. Calculation was invisible until it wasn't. She needed to know what she was dealing with before she moved. Her first call was to Diane Torres, her oldest friend, and, conveniently, a paralegal at a firm that handled corporate fraud cases. Not to tell her what she'd found, just to ask, casually, whether Diane had ever come across the name Voss in any of the cases she worked. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Elena, why are you asking me that research? Elena said, for work. We have a client whose ex-husband has ties to. Elena, what? I'm fine. I'm doing research. Another pause. Come over for dinner Thursday. I can't Thursday. I have the rehearsal dinner. The words came out of her mouth before she processed what she was saying, and there was a silence on Diane's end that lasted exactly long enough to be meaningful. Right, Diane said finally. The rehearsal dinner. I'll call you after the weekend, Elena said, and hung up. She sat on her kitchen floor for a few minutes, which was something she'd started doing years ago during hard weeks, just sitting on the floor because it was lower than everything else, and somehow that helped. The tile was cold through her jeans. She stared at the baseboards. Paul Marlowe, pending. Her father had worked in finance. Municipal bonds, infrastructure investment, dry and unglamorous work that had kept their family comfortable without ever making them wealthy. He had traveled for work sometimes. He had been quiet and methodical and had an orderly mind. He had taught Elena to play chess when she was 8 and had never let her win on purpose, which she'd resented at 12 and been grateful for at 30. He had died of a heart attack. She had never questioned that. Why would she? She got up off the floor. She opened her laptop. She started pulling what she could find publicly about Victor Voss's organization, which wasn't much, because that was rather the point of how such organizations operated. But there were things in court records, civil cases, real estate transactions, a deposition from 2014 that had been partially unsealed. She read until 2 in the morning. Then she made a list of what she knew and what she needed to know, and then she made a second list of how she was going to keep functioning for the next 3 days, without letting Adrian see that anything had changed. Second list was harder. Adrian called at 9 the next morning. "You left early last night," he said. His voice was the same voice it always was. That was the maddening part. She had expected to hear something different now, a false note, something she'd missed before. It sounded exactly the same. "I had a headache," she said. "The drive helped. You should have told me. I would have driven you. I didn't want to pull you away from your father." A brief pause. Not long enough to mean anything on its own. "He can be a lot," Adrian said. "He can," Elena agreed. This was the performance she needed to sustain. She had been performing competence and composure for most of her adult life, in courtrooms and crisis centers, and at her mother's table with bill collectors on the line. She could do this. She just had to decide what she was doing it for, before she ran out of time. "Dinner tonight?" Adrian asked. "I have work until 7. Can we make it 8? 8 is fine. I'll cook." He always cooked on Tuesdays. She'd always liked that about him. She said goodbye and set the phone face down on her desk and breathed very carefully for a moment, the way you breathe when you don't want the sound to escape. She went back to the house that afternoon. She had told Adrian she had a site visit for work on the North Shore, which was almost true. She'd rescheduled a client meeting to the area deliberately to give herself cover. The housekeeper, Mrs. Farrow, let her in without question. Elena had been coming to this house for months. She was about to be the woman of it. Mrs. Farrow offered tea. Elena said yes, thank you, and asked if Mrs. Farrow would mind if she used the upstairs office to make some calls. She said the cell reception in the area was better from the second floor. Mrs. Farrow said of course, and went to put the kettle on. Elena was in the study in under 2 minutes. She didn't go straight to the drawer. She looked at the desk first, the surface of it, the papers. Most of it was real estate documents. Nothing that told her anything she didn't already know. There was a folder marked with a date from last month. Inside it were 6 pages of what looked like financial routing records, account numbers in offshore jurisdictions, transfers between entities with names that told her nothing, shell companies. She recognized the structure from the fraud cases she'd read about at Diane's firm, but the amounts were significant, 8 figures, and at the bottom of the 3rd page, someone had handwritten a single word in red ink, Federal. She photographed everything on her phone. Then she opened the bottom drawer. The ring was still there. The ledger was still there. She photographed the ledger, page by page, starting from the earliest entries. It took 11 minutes. Her hands were steadier than she expected. She got to the page with her father's name and stopped. There was a second notation she hadn't seen before, or hadn't registered. Below pending, in different ink, slightly lighter, added later, transferred, see M file. She looked for an M file. There wasn't one in the drawer. She checked the shelf, running her fingers along the spines quickly. One of the books, a worn paperback, James Elroy L. A Confidential, was heavier than it should be. She pulled it out. Hollow inside, the pages cut away, and inside it, folded once, a single sheet of paper with a name at the top, Margaret Marlowe, her mother. Elena stood in that study, holding a document that described, in the dry and bloodless language of people who thought of human beings as assets, the terms of an agreement made in December 2011 between Victor Voss and a man named Paul Marlowe. Cooperation, access to municipal finance accounts, 5 specific infrastructure projects, and the transfer of an unnamed guarantor, her mother, to Voss's influence in the event that Paul Marlowe failed to deliver. Her father had made a deal with Victor Voss, and then apparently her father had died, and the deal had passed to her mother, and the wedding she had planned for 3 days from now With the dress and the invitations and the flowers that were already at the venue, the wedding was not about Elena and Adrian at all. It was a mechanism. A way for Victor to complete what he started 15 years ago, to pull the Marlowe name officially inside the circle. She put the paper back in the hollow book. She put the book back on the shelf. She went downstairs and drank her tea and made 12 minutes of small talk with Mrs. Farrow about the weather and the caterer and whether peonies held up in late spring heat. She was operating on something close to autopilot, and she knew it. And she also knew that if she stopped even for a second, she would shatter into pieces on Mrs. Farrow's clean kitchen floor, and she could not afford that yet. Dinner with Adrian was harder. He made pasta. He made it well simple tomato, good olive oil, fresh basil he grew himself on the kitchen windowsill because Adrian Voss, heir to one of Chicago's most feared criminal organizations, kept a small kitchen herb garden that he tended with genuine care. This was the person she had agreed to marry. This was the person she thought she knew. She watched him cook and tried to figure out what was true. That was the thing the ledger and the documents and her mother's name on that paper had not answered what Adrian knew, whether he was his father's instrument or something else. The ring in the drawer troubled her in a way she hadn't fully examined yet. The ledger was his grandfather's handwriting. She was fairly certain now. The annotations that followed, including the ones about her father, were in a third hand she didn't recognize. Only the red ink notation, Federal, had been potentially in Adrian's hand, and that one read less like a record and more like a warning to himself. "You're somewhere else tonight," he said, setting a bowl in front of her. "Tired," she said. The site visit ran long. "You don't have to pretend to be fine all the time." The specific cruelty of that sentence, coming from him, at this particular moment, almost broke her composure entirely. Picked up her fork. "Who's pretending?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. His eyes were hard to read at the best of times, steady, watchful. The eyes of someone who had learned, very young, to reveal less than he saw. She had found that quality compelling when she met him. Now it felt like a wall. "Elena, tell me about your grandfather," she said. Stopped. "What? You almost never mention him." I realized I barely know anything about him. Adrian set down his fork. His face did something careful and complicated. "What made you think of him?" "Your house. All the old things in it. I was there today and I just started wondering about the history. The family history." He was quiet for long enough that she had time to take 2 bites of pasta that she tasted nothing of. "My grandfather built the organization," Adrian said finally. "The version of it that exists now. My father inherited it and expanded it. I grew up thinking that was just what our family did. The way other families run hardware stores." His voice was flat in a way it wasn't usually. "I was 18 before I understood what expanded actually meant. What it cost." "What did it cost?" He looked at her directly. "People." The word sat between them like something dropped from a height. "Adrian," she said carefully, "is there anything you need to tell me?" Before Saturday. The question was so much smaller than what she actually meant that she almost laughed at herself. He heard something in it anyway. She could see the hesitation move through him, something deciding in his face. "There are things I've been handling," he said finally. "Things that need to be resolved before I can explain them properly. I need you to trust me for a few more days." "Trust you," she repeated. "I know that's a lot to ask." She nodded slowly. "It is." She stayed another hour. She helped him wash the dishes. She let him hold her in the kitchen doorway, for a moment the way he sometimes did, his chin against her hair, both of them quiet. She let herself have 30 seconds of believing that it was simple. She was wrong. That the ledger had an explanation, and her father's name was a coincidence, and everything was going to be fine. Then she pulled back and said goodnight and walked to her car. She had 2 days. The rehearsal dinner was at Victor Voss's penthouse downtown. Elena wore a dark blue dress that her mother said was too serious for the occasion. She wore it anyway. Her mother sat across the table from her in a cream-colored silk blouse and pearl earrings, making small talk with Victor's associate and his wife, and Elena watched her mother's face carefully all evening, the slight tightening around her eyes when Victor spoke. The way she held her wine glass with both hands, like she needed something to anchor her to the chair. Her mother knew. Elena wasn't sure how much, or from how long ago, but her mother knew something. She'd known it for years, and she'd been carrying it, and she had never said a word. Elena thought about all the phone calls over the past 14 months, when her mother had expressed some small reservation about Adrian, and then immediately walked it back. "He seems lovely, of course he does. I'm just being an overprotective old woman." She'd thought her mother was anxious about losing her. That wasn't it at all. Victor Voss was 63 and looked a decade younger, the kind of man whose money had settled into his bones and slowed time for him while it accelerated for everyone around him. He was charming in that specific way of men who have never had to work at being charming because they have always had better leverage. He told 2 stories at dinner that made the table laugh. He toasted Elena specifically, called her a welcome addition to the family, held his glass in her direction with a smile that showed all his teeth. A symbol of loyalty, he said. That's what this marriage represents. 2 families that have history, coming home to each other. Elena held his gaze and smiled back. She thought about her father's name in the ledger. She thought about the word pending. She thought about her mother's hands on that wine glass. The men arrived at 9:47 p.m. Elena knew something was wrong before she understood what it was, a shift in the behavior of the men near the elevator. 2 of Victor's that she'd catalogued without meaning to over the course of the evening. They moved differently suddenly, tighter. And then she heard Adrian's voice from the hallway, low and precise, speaking to someone she couldn't see, and the tone of it was nothing like the man who grew herbs on his kitchen windowsill. She excused herself from the table and moved toward the hallway and stopped just short of the doorway. Be moved tonight, Adrian was saying. The timing is wrong. The timing isn't up to you anymore. A voice she didn't recognize. They know where he is. If we don't move him in the next hour, if you move him now, you blow the whole thing. 3 months, Adrian. The other voice, hard and final. They're sending 4 men. We cannot sit on him, a silence. Then Adrian said very quietly, get the car. I'll be down in 10 minutes. Elena stepped back from the doorway. Her heart was loud in her own ears. She turned to go back to the table and nearly walked into Victor Voss. He was standing 2 feet behind her, holding a glass of scotch, watching her with an expression of mild amusement that was the most frightening thing she had seen in a room full of frightening things. Ms. Marlowe, he said. Looking for the restroom? Yes, she said. Her voice was perfectly even, down the hall. Second door on the left. He smiled. Don't wander too far. The dessert course is coming. She nodded and went down the hall and into the bathroom and closed the door and stood with her back against it. Someone was being protected. Adrian was protecting someone. And men were coming to what? Remove the witness. That was what the conversation had been. And Adrian was going to try to prevent it, alone or near enough to alone. And Victor was standing 12 feet away watching his future daughter-in-law and making sure she sat down to dessert. She pulled out her phone. She had the photographs of the ledger and the financial documents and her mother's agreement, all of it backed up to 2 separate encrypted drives she'd set up the previous morning. She had a contact at the FBI field office in Chicago, not a close contact, not a friend. A woman named Agent Carla Dines, who had consulted on a domestic violence case 2 years ago, and who had given Elena her card at the end of it and said if you ever need to reach out. She had never used it. She looked at the card for about 4 seconds. Then she heard the sound of raised voices from the main room, and something that might have been furniture moving, and then what was definitely not furniture. She opened the bathroom door. 2 men she had not seen at dinner were in the living room. Large men, overcoats, the specific stillness of people waiting for a signal. Victor was not alarmed. That was notable. He had retreated slightly toward the window and was watching with the calm attention of someone observing something they had arranged in advance. Elena's mother had gone pale and very still in her chair. Adrian's uncle, the only other Voss present, was on his feet but not moving. Adrian was between the 2 men and the hallway. You're making a mistake, he said. His voice was quiet, professionally quiet. Whatever my father told you, this isn't how this ends. The taller of the 2 men glanced at Victor. Victor made a small gesture with his scotch glass. Permission. The tall man moved toward the hallway. Adrian put himself in the way. Elena did not think about it. She moved to the study off the main room, Victor's study, open because why would he need to close it? This was his home, found the credenza, found the envelope she had seen, sitting there all evening, because she'd been cataloging everything all evening, picked it up, looked at it. Financial documents, the routing records. Not the same ones she'd photographed in Adrian's study, but the same type. Picked up a content folder. A third. She didn't have the ledger. She didn't have the hollow book with her mother's agreement. But she had this. She had her phone with the photographs. And she had Agent Carla Dines' number. She walked back into the living room. Victor, she said. Everyone looked at her. Victor's expression shifted to something between amusement and calculation. I want to talk to you, she said. About my father's agreement. The one dated December 2011. The one that transferred my mother as guarantor. The room was absolutely silent. Adrian turned to look at her. His face was doing something she had never seen it do before. Something cracking through the control. Something raw and alarmed, and under that, something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Victor set down his scotch. "You're a clever girl," he said. His voice hadn't changed at all. "Tell your men to stand down," Elena said. "And then you and I are going to have a real conversation about what this family actually is." Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the folders she was holding. Then he looked at Adrian, and he smiled. "Of course," he said. "Talk." But his eyes, Elena noticed, did not move to her when he said it. They moved to the two men near the hallway, and the men moved toward her. Part 2, the weight of what she knows. The first man reached her in 4 steps. Adrian moved faster. He put himself between Elena and the man with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this kind of intervention without ever wanting to, 1, hand out. His body angled in a way that was not aggressive, but was unmistakably final. "Don't," he said. 1 word. The man stopped. Not because of the word, but because of the way Adrian said such quiet and without heat. The way you speak when you have already decided what comes next, and the other person hasn't caught up yet. Victor watched all of this with his hands loosely at his sides. "Adrian," he said. His tone was paternal, disappointed. The tone of a man correcting a child in front of company. "She's holding documents from my study. That's a simple matter of property." "Those are my documents," Elena said. Her voice surprised her steadier than her hands, which were gripping the folders so hard she could feel the edges of the paper through the cardstock covers. "Copies of them, anyway. The originals are somewhere, you'll never find them." That was a lie. The originals were in Adrian's hidden study on the North Shore, right where she'd left them. And if Victor sent someone there, in the next 40 minutes, they'd find everything. But the photographs were real, backed up and distributed, and Victor didn't know how much she'd seen or how long she'd had to work with it. Victor looked at her the way you look at something that has become inconvenient. "Down, Elena," he said. "I'd rather stand, that wasn't a request." Adrian's jaw tightened. She could see it from where she stood, 6 feet to his left, the muscle in his face going hard. "She's not going to sit down," he said. "Adrian." Victor's voice dropped half a register. "This does not concern her. You made it concern her, the moment you wrote her mother's name in that agreement." The room shifted. Not physically, nobody moved, but something in the air changed pressure, the way it does before weather. Victor's expression went flat and careful, which was worse than the amusement had been, because the amusement had been performance, and this was something real underneath it. "We'll discuss this privately," Victor said. "We'll discuss it now," Elena said. The 2 men near the hallway hadn't moved since Adrian blocked them. They were watching Victor, waiting. Elena's mother had not made a sound. Elena could see her in her peripheral vision, both hands now flat on the table in front of her, not gripping anything, just pressing down, like she was trying to push herself through the floor. Adrian's uncle had sat back down and was looking at a point on the wall slightly above everyone's heads, the practiced absence of a man who has learned to not be present during certain conversations. Victor Voss walked to the chair nearest the window and sat down. He crossed one leg over the other and picked up his scotch from the side table. He looked, Elena thought, almost bored. That was the most dangerous version of him she had encountered so far. "Your father," Victor said, "was a brilliant man. Genuinely. One of the most capable financial architects I have ever worked with. He swirled the glass. He was also ultimately a coward." Elena didn't let herself react. She counted her breathing, in through the nose, out. "Came to me," Victor continued. "That's important for you to understand. He came to me with an opportunity, a real one, not something I manufactured. Municipal bonds, infrastructure funds. He had the access and the relationships and the legitimate cover. I had the capital and the patience. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement for almost 3 years. Until he tried to walk away," Elena said. Victor looked at her with something that might, in a different man, have been respect. "Until he tried to walk away," he confirmed. "Yes. At which point the nature of the arrangement required a different kind of security. Your mother was the logical guarantor. She was a co-signatory on 2 of the accounts. She had exposure. You threatened her. I protected my investment." Elena heard Adrian make a sound that was not quite a word. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Victor. "And my father," she said, "the heart attack." Victor said nothing. He drank his scotch. Adrian's voice was very careful. "Tell her there is nothing to tell." Victor set the glass down. Paul Marlowe had a cardiac event at 61 years old. Men of that age and that particular stress level. Don't, Adrian said. Don't. He moved now, 3 steps toward his father, close enough that Victor had to look up at him. She found the ledger. She knows what the notation means. Don't insult her. Elena watched Victor look up at his son, and she watched something happen in Victor's face that she had not expected and could not entirely read, something that was not warmth and not regret, but was some older, more corroded version of both. A man looking at someone he'd built and finding too late that the building had happened differently than he'd planned. What the notation means, Victor said quietly, is that her father's situation was pending resolution. He resolved it himself. I had no part in it. The ledger says otherwise, Elena said. The ledger is my father's record, Adrian said, not Victor's. Elena turned to look at him then. He was still facing his father, but his voice had shifted, and she heard something in it, not evasion, but precision. The kind of precision you use when you're being technically accurate, because the full truth is more complicated than the room can hold right now. Your grandfather's ledger, she said, not yours. No, but you knew it was there. Yes, and you knew my father's name was in it. The pause before he answered was about 2 seconds long. It felt like falling. Yes, he said. Elena walked out of Victor Voss's penthouse at 10:23 p.m. with 3 folders under her arm, her mother's hand in hers, and the sensation of having swallowed something sharp and metallic that had not finished moving through her yet. Adrian followed them to the elevator. Elena, not here, she said. Let me explain, Adrian. She pressed the call button. I said not here. Her mother said nothing. She had not spoken since before the men came through. She was walking very straight, shoulders back. The bearing of a woman who has survived something before and knows the procedure. Elena had not seen her mother look like this since the funeral. Since standing at the graveside with 53 people around her and the priest mispronouncing her husband's middle name. The elevator came. They got in. Adrian did not follow. He stood at the edge of the hallway watching the doors close, and his face in that last moment, she'd remember it. She'd spend a lot of time over the next 24 hours trying to stop remembering it. He looked like a man watching something fall that he had been holding up for a long time and had finally dropped. In the elevator, her mother said, "How long have you known?" 2 days, Elena said. Her mother closed her eyes. "Mom, I thought it was over," her mother said. Her voice was the voice of someone who had rehearsed grief for a specific occasion and then had to use it for something else. After your father, I thought Victor would just let it go. He had no reason anymore, there was nothing left to take. He had you. I'm not worth anything to him. You are if he can attach you to the family through me. Her mother opened her eyes and looked at her. She looked old suddenly, which she usually didn't. She was 64 and maintained herself with the particular determination of a woman who had come from nothing and clung to every inch of respectability she'd built. But tonight she looked every year of it, and more. I should have told you, her mother said. Yes, Elena said. You should have. Neither of them said anything else until they reached the lobby. She put her mother in a cab and watched it pull away, and then stood on the sidewalk in the October air with the folders still in her hands and the noise of the city around her, and thought, with crystalline clarity, about the next 12 hours. She could run. Get her mother. Go somewhere. Victor didn't know about. Wait for what? There was no cavalry coming unless she called one. She could call one. She had the photographs, and she had Agent Dines' number, and she had enough documented to at least get someone's attention, probably. But there was something else. Adrian's conversation in the hallway before the men arrived. 3 months of... and then the interruption. 3 months of what? The red ink in the study. Federal. The financial routing records he'd kept, copies of his father's operation, kept in a hidden room in a house his father thought was empty. Adrian was not running the empire. He was building a case against it. She didn't know if that made her feel better or worse. She got in her car and drove to her apartment and sat at her kitchen table with the folders spread open and her phone in front of her, and the time reading 11:07 p.m., and she called Adrian. Picked up on the first ring. I need to know everything, she said, from the beginning. Tonight, a silence. Then okay. Not your place either. My apartment now. Give me 30 minutes. He was there in 22. He stood in her kitchen, looking like someone who hadn't slept in a long time, but had gotten very skilled at hiding it. He was still in the suit from the dinner, jacket off, no tie now, and she noticed for the first time a small cut above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before. She didn't ask about it. She pointed at the chair across from her, at the kitchen table, and waited until he sat. You knew about my father, she said, before we met. Yes, How long? I found the ledger when I was 24. I was going through my grandfather's things after he died. He looked at his hands. The name meant nothing to me then. Just a name. Dozens of names. But you looked it up. Eventually. Yes. And then you came to the fundraiser. He met her eyes. It wasn't planned. Meeting you wasn't Elena. I want you to understand that. What I understand, she said, is that you knew my father's name was in your family's ledger, and you never told me. What I understand is that you proposed to me knowing that your father intended to use that marriage to close a deal that my father died rather than honor. I didn't know that last part at the time of the proposal. When did you know it? 3 months ago. 3 months of What did you do, she said, when you found out? He was quiet for a moment. He pressed the heel of his palm against the table, a small reflexive gesture, the habit of a man who controls his body language very precisely. I went to a federal contact, he said. Someone I'd been building a relationship with for 2 years. I told him I wanted to give him everything. The accounts, the routing records, the witness names, the operation structure, everything. In exchange for what? Immunity for myself. And I asked for protection for your mother. Before I even knew about the agreement, I wanted her out of whatever exposure she had. Elena stared at him. You were building a case against your own father. I've been building it for 2 years. The documents you found in the study, those are my copies. I've been pulling records, photographing originals, identifying assets. The witness tonight, the man my father's men were going to move. He's a former accountant. He can corroborate 4 of the offshore account structures. He's been in a safe location for 11 weeks. And tonight nearly blew that. Tonight nearly blew everything. He exhaled. When you walked back in with those folders, he stopped. Something moved through his face. I thought my heart stopped. It almost did more than that, she said. Those men were moving toward me. I know. What would have happened if you hadn't been there? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Elena stood up and went to the kitchen window and looked out at the street below, the ordinary late-night life of it. Taxis and restaurant stragglers and someone walking a dog, all of it looking aggressively normal from here. She thought about her mother in a cab on the way home to an apartment that Victor Voss knew the address of. She thought about an accountant in a safe house somewhere in this city with 11 weeks of careful planning behind him. She thought about Adrian sitting at her kitchen table with a cut above his eyebrow and 2 years of secret work between him and the truth. What happens now, she said, without turning? We accelerate the timeline. My contact at the FBI can move faster if I give him the routing records. You have the copies you made, combined with what I already have. You want to use my evidence. I want to close this before my father realizes how far it's gone. Turned around and the wedding. He held her gaze. We cancel it. Victor won't accept that. No, he won't. So what does that look like? It looks like 3 days of pretending nothing has changed while we get the documentation to the right people and get your mother somewhere safe and position the accountant for testimony. He paused. It looks like you trusting me for 72 hours. You asked me to trust you last night. I know, and I should have asked you then what I'm asking you now. She came back to the table. She sat down. She looked at him directly, no distance, no performance. Why my father's name was in the ledger under the word pending, and what happened to him. Adrian didn't look away. The notation means he was scheduled for a conversation with my grandfather's enforcer. Conversation that was supposed to happen in January of 2012. He died in November of 2011. Yes, so the conversation never happened. The official record says no. What does the unofficial record say? He was quiet for 8 seconds. She counted them. My grandfather, Adrian said, had a man named Terrence Boyle on his payroll for 11 years. Boyle is dead, now died in 2019. Natural causes, I've confirmed it. In 2011, Boyle was involved in 3 situations that the ledger categorizes under the term resolved. Your father's situation was pending, and then it was transferred. I don't know with certainty what transferred means. I have a theory. Tell me the theory. The theory is that my grandfather transferred responsibility for the Marlowe situation to Victor. That Victor chose to handle it differently than the grandfather would have. That the differently means your father's cardiac event was not intervention, but leverage that someone approached him with what would happen to your mother if he didn't cooperate, and that your father... He stopped, pressed his palm to the table again. Your father was not a strong man in certain ways. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it clinically. The stress of that kind of threat for a man his age, with a cardiac history. He had a cardiac history? A minor one. 2009. His doctor's records are in the files Victor kept. Elena sat very still. Victor didn't kill your father, Adrian said quietly, but he scared him to death. And I believe he knew exactly what he was doing and considered it a clean solution. Kitchen was very quiet. The dog walker had gone. The street below was almost empty. All right, Elena said. Elena, I said all right. Her voice was not angry. It was something past anger on the other side of it, where everything was very cold and very clear. Give me your contact's number at the FBI. The photographs I took are already in an encrypted backup. I'll need your routing records, the full set, not just what I found tonight. He blinked. You're in. My father made a deal that killed him. My mother has been living under that deal for 15 years. You want to take Victor down, so do I. She met his eyes. But understand something, Adrian. When this is over, when the federal case is filed and your father is in custody and my mother is safe, we are going to have a separate conversation about what you knew and when and why you didn't tell me. And that conversation has nothing to do with the FBI and everything to do with us. He nodded. He looked like he'd been expecting that and was glad to finally have it said. Separate conversation, he agreed. After. She pushed back from the table. Now tell me about the accountant. What's his name? Where is he? And how secure is the location? His name was David Kern. He was 57, formerly the senior accounts manager for a Voss-linked shell company called Harrow Capital Group, and he had been cooperating with Adrian's FBI contact, a man named Agent Rourke, field office, financial crimes unit, for approximately 4 months before Adrian brought him the routing records that doubled the value of Kern's testimony. The safe location was a rented house in Pilsen, a quiet street, 2 agents rotating shifts outside. It had been until tonight, well below Victor's radar. Tonight changed that, Adrian said. They were at her kitchen table still, but the folders were open now, and there was coffee neither of them was drinking. It was past 1 in the morning. Victor knows I intervened when his men tried to move. He's going to start pulling on threads. How fast? Fast enough that 72 hours may be optimistic. Elena looked at the routing records he'd brought from his car, a thick accordion folder of documents she was sorting through with the methodical efficiency she usually applied to court case files. She had a good eye for financial structure. The nonprofit work required it. Grant tracking and audit trails. What she was looking at now was not so different in structure, just inverted in intent. Money moving inward instead of outward. Accounts receiving instead of dispersing. The same shell mechanics, just pointed in the wrong direction. These 3 accounts, she said. She tapped 3 pages. They clear through a Cayman entity. What's the corresponding domestic account? Adrian leaned over to look. He pointed to a notation in the margin. That one. Registered to a real estate holding company in Naperville, which is a legitimate company. Legitimate enough to withstand casual scrutiny. Not a detailed forensic audit. Has Kern confirmed the transfer sequence? Kern can trace 5 cycles going back to 2018. Before that, it was structured differently, and he wasn't in position to see it. But post-2018 is enough. For a charging document. Yes. Elena nodded. She put those 3 pages together and set them aside as a stack. Kept sorting. Adrian watched her work and didn't speak, which she appreciated. She needed the silence and the task together. She needed something to do with her hands that was not thinking about her father in a doctor's office in 2009, alone with a cardiac event and a man from Victor Voss's organization somewhere in his recent history. She found the page she was looking for 40 minutes later. A routing record from 2021, a transfer she wouldn't have noticed without the context of everything else, but which connected one of Victor's primary operational accounts to a smaller account, not a shell company, an actual LLC, registered in Illinois. The LLC's registered agent was listed at the bottom of the page. The name was Margaret Marlowe. Elena held very still. Adrian, she said, what? She turned the page to face him. He read it. His face did something she hadn't seen it do before. I didn't know about that, he said. That's not in the files I pulled. It wouldn't be. Victor would have structured it separately. She set the page down carefully. My mother is not just a guarantor. Victor incorporated her into the financial structure. She's a registered agent on an active account, which means if this goes federal without proper handling, she has exposure. Elena's voice was even criminal exposure. They looked at each other across the folders and the cold coffee and the 1 in the morning kitchen. Rourke can extend immunity, Adrian said, if she cooperates voluntarily, before the case breaks. Yes. Elena pressed both hands flat on the table. I need to talk to my mother tonight. It's 1:30 in the morning. I know what time it is. She was already reaching for her phone. Her mother answered on the third ring, voice alert in the way of people who hadn't been sleeping. Elena told her she was coming over. Her mother said now? Elena said yes now, and her mother was quiet for a moment and then said the door would be open. Adrian drove. Neither of them suggested otherwise. The drive to Evanston took 22 minutes at this hour. They didn't talk much. At one point, stopped at a light, Adrian said, "I should have told you everything 6 months ago." "Yes," she said. "You should have. I was afraid of what it would do." "I know, that's not an excuse." "No, it's not." The light changed. He drove. Her mother was sitting in the living room in her robe, the lamp on, a cup of tea on the table in front of her. She looked at Adrian when they came in. Her expression was complicated in the way of a woman encountering someone she has conflicting information about. "Mrs. Marlowe," Adrian said, "I'm sorry for everything you've been carrying." Her mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Elena. "Sit down," she said. Both of you, they sat. And Elena's mother told them about December 2011. She'd known about the deal before Paul told her. She'd found the documents herself, not in a hidden drawer, but in a filing cabinet in his home office, right where he kept everything else, because Paul Marlowe had not been a secretive man by nature. He'd been a frightened one who had run out of ideas. He'd told her everything when she confronted him. The original arrangement with Victor's father, the access he'd provided, the money he'd moved, through accounts that were technically legitimate, through infrastructure funds that were technically real, but which had been, at the margins, moving other money alongside the legitimate funds. He had known what he was doing. He had not done it out of greed, or not only out of greed. He'd done it because a man from the Voss organization had come to him in 2008, when his business was struggling, and had offered him a way out of a situation that would otherwise have cost him his house and possibly his daughter's college tuition. He'd said yes. He'd regretted it almost immediately, and had spent 3 years trying to find a way out. The way out, the Voss organization told him, in October 2011, was not available. He had a heart attack 2 weeks after that meeting. Margaret Marlowe said, her voice was steady in the way of grief that has had many years to calcify. The doctor said the blockage had been building for a long time, that it wasn't that there was no single cause. She looked at her tea. "I always wondered. Victor didn't physically cause it," Adrian said carefully. "I know," her mother said. "That's almost worse, isn't it?" She had kept quiet after Paul died because she was afraid, and because she had 2 accounts in her name she hadn't known how to extract herself from, and because a man had come to her door 6 weeks after the funeral with a simple message, "Mr. Voss sends his condolences. The arrangement continues." And she had understood, completely and without ambiguity, what that meant. She had protected Elena from it the only way she'd known how. She had never introduced her to anyone from that world. She had never discussed the finances of those years. She had actively avoided any social connection to the Voss family. "And then you brought Adrian home," she said to Elena. "You should have told me. What would you have done?" "Left him." "I know." Her mother finally looked up. "That's why I didn't tell you. Because you were happy. And I had been carrying this alone for 12 years, and I wanted you to have something I didn't." Elena sat with that for a moment. "Mom," she said, "Adrian's working with the FBI. There's going to be a case. Victor's organization is going to come down." She paused. "But your name is on an account. We need to fix that before it breaks." Her mother looked at Adrian. "Can you fix it?" "I can try," he said. "If you give a voluntary statement to Agent Rourke before the filing, we can structure your cooperation as a condition of immunity. You'd need an attorney present. I know someone. Tonight? First thing tomorrow." Her mother nodded. One small, precise nod, like someone checking an item off a list they'd been keeping for 12 years. "All right," she said. "Tell me what I need to do." They left Evanston at 3:20 in the morning. The sky was still fully dark. Elena was in the passenger seat with the accordion folder on her lap and her phone in her hand, and she was composing a text to Agent Dines, the contact she'd identified herself, separate from Adrian's channel, because she had decided about an hour ago that running this entirely through Adrian's existing relationship with Rourke was not how she wanted to play it. She wanted her own line, her own confirmation that the immunity arrangement was real and documented before her mother walked into any room and said a single word. She sent the text at 3:24 a.m. It was brief. "I have documentation of Voss Organization financial operations. I need a conversation at your earliest availability. This is time sensitive. E. Marlowe." She put the phone in her lap. 2 channels, Adrian said. He'd seen her typing. 2 channels, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. Smarter. I know. You don't entirely trust me. She looked out the window. The city at this hour was a different city, same streets, different density, a version of Chicago that belonged to shift workers and insomniacs, and people driving home from things they weren't going to explain. I trust what you're trying to do, she said. I don't entirely trust your judgment about what I need to know and when. Those are different things. Fair. Yes, it is. Her phone lit up at 3:31 a.m. 7 minutes. Agent Dines had been awake. I know who you are. I've been waiting for this call for 8 months. Tell me where and when. Elena read it twice. Then she showed it to Adrian without speaking. He read it. His hands tightened on the wheel slightly, then released. She's been building a parallel case, he said. Looks like. Which means we're not the only people working against my father. Which means, Elena said, that we have less time than we thought. The FBI field office has 2 independent threads running on Victor simultaneously. One of them is going to move. And when it moves, everyone in the blast radius needs to already be positioned. He exhaled. I need to call Rourke. I know, and I need to meet Dines. Tonight, as soon as she can. He pulled over on a quiet block, hazards on, and called Rourke. Elena stepped out of the car and called Dines. She stood on the sidewalk in the October cold. Without a coat, she'd left it at Victor's penthouse. She realized, which was a problem she would deal with another time. And she talked to a federal agent for 14 minutes, giving her the outline of what she had and what her mother's situation was and what Adrian had been building. Dines listened without interrupting. At the end, she said, Miss Marlowe, 2 things. First, the immunity for your mother can be arranged before noon tomorrow if she comes in voluntarily with an attorney. Second, the wedding. The wedding isn't happening, Elena said. Victor Voss doesn't know that yet. Elena understood what the agent was not quite saying. You want us to keep the appearance of it for 48 hours. If Victor believes the wedding is still on, he has no reason to accelerate whatever contingency plan he's running. He'll wait for Saturday. That gives us time to position everything before he realizes. Before he realizes it's already over. Elena pressed her free hand against the cold of the car roof. She could see Adrian through the windshield, on his own call, face and profile, speaking quickly. And if something moves before 48 hours, then we move with it, Dines said. But Ms. Marlowe, if Victor realizes what you've done, if he understands that you walked out of that penthouse with documents and made contact with federal investigators, he won't wait for Saturday. Elena looked up at the sky. No stars visible from here, too much ambient light, just the flat orange-gray that passed for darkness in the middle of a city. I know, she said. Are you willing to stay in position for 48 hours? Stay, she said. But I need your guarantee on my mother, before 9 a.m. tomorrow. You'll have it. She hung up and got back in the car. Adrian was finishing his call. He ended it, set the phone on the dash, looked at her. Rourke says the timing on the Kern testimony is tight, he said. If something moves before the accounting records are formally submitted. Dines wants 48 hours, Elena said. Keep the wedding appearance. Buy time. Rourke wants the same thing. Both their hands are on the clock. Yes, she buckled her seatbelt. Take me home. I need 4 hours of sleep. And then I need to show up to my own wedding rehearsal brunch tomorrow morning like nothing happened. Adrian stared at her. The brunch is at Victor's. I know where the brunch is, Adrian. Elena, he expects me there. Dines needs 48 hours. Rourke needs 48 hours. You need 48 hours. She looked at him. I need to sit across a table from the man who frightened my father to death and eat eggs and make conversation about centerpieces. So drive he drove. She was quiet for most of the ride. Somewhere on Lakeshore Drive, she put her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes. Not sleeping, just resting them, the city moving past in streaks of light on the inside of her eyelids. She was thinking about her father, about the filing cabinet where he'd kept his documents in plain sight because he wasn't a secretive man, just a frightened one, about the chess games when she was 8 and how he never let her win on purpose, which had felt cruel at the time and felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever done for her in retrospect. She thought about what she was going to feel when all of this was over, when there was space to feel it. She didn't try to feel it now. Now wasn't the time. She opened her eyes when Adrian pulled up to her building. Get some sleep, she said. Elena, sleep, Adrian. We need to function tomorrow. She was almost to the door when he called her name again from the car window. Turned. The ring in the drawer, he said. The one you found. It was my grandfather's first wife. She left him in 1987. She was the only person he ever talked about, as though he was ashamed of what he'd done to her. He paused. I kept it because I needed to remember what the family did to people who tried to leave. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold and looked at him. I'll see you at the brunch, she said. She went inside. The lobby was quiet and too warm and smelled like cleaning fluid, and Elena stood in it for a moment before the elevator, just standing, before the next 48 hours gathered itself and began. Part 3, The Things That Break a Plan. The brunch was at 10. Elena was there at 9:58, because being late to Victor Voss's table was a statement she could not afford to make today. She wore a cream blouse and dark trousers, and the ring on her left hand, and a smile she'd been practicing in her bathroom mirror since 7 a.m. The smile was the hardest part. Not because she couldn't produce it. She'd spent 6 years producing professional warmth for people in crisis, a skill that required keeping yourself at a distance from your own face, but because Adrian was already there when she arrived, standing near the window with a cup of coffee and a bruise she hadn't noticed last night developing under his left eye. And when he saw her, the look on his face was so unguarded for just a second that the smile almost slipped. Kept it. Victor came out of the kitchen himself. He was in a weekend shirt, untucked, reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he looked like a man who had slept 8 full hours and eaten a good breakfast and had no particular concerns about any meeting that had occurred in his penthouse 12 hours ago. This was, Elena understood, a performance. She recognized it because she was giving one too. Elena. He kissed her cheek, continental light like they were relatives at a holiday. You look well. Considering. Considering what? She said pleasantly. He smiled, the stress of a wedding, all those details. I've learned to delegate, she said. He laughed. He actually laughed, and guided her by the elbow toward the table, and poured her coffee himself. And for about 45 minutes, Elena Marlowe sat at Victor Voss's table, eating a very good frittata and discussing centerpiece flowers and the seating chart for a wedding that was never going to happen. And every 7 or 8 minutes she felt her phone in her jacket pocket and thought about whether Dines had called her mother's attorney yet and whether 48 hours was a number she actually believed in. Adrian sat across from her. They made eye contact 3 times. The 3rd time he looked at her like he had something to tell her and couldn't. She looked back at him like, not now. He looked at his coffee. Victor watched all of this with the attention of a man reading a contract, looking for the clause that hadn't been there the last time he checked. Call from Dines came at 11:43, 20 minutes, after Elena had excused herself from the brunch table to answer what she described as a work emergency. She was standing in the stairwell of Victor's building, door closed, 8 floors of empty concrete around her. We have a problem, Dines said. The 3 words landed in Elena's chest like something dropped from a height. Kept her voice level. What kind? Kern, the accountant Adrian has been holding. A pause. Gone. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. Gone as in the safe house in Pilsen was empty at 6 this morning when the overnight agent went to do a check. Both agents on duty are unaccounted for. We have a scene that suggests that the departure was not voluntary. Elena pressed her back against the concrete wall. The stairwell was very cold and smelled like dust. Victor moved on him, she said. We don't know that with certainty yet. What we know is that our primary corroborating witness for the offshore account structures is missing, and that the 2 agents assigned to him. Dines stopped. When she came back, her voice was careful in a way it hadn't been before. We're treating this as a potential officer-down situation. 2 federal agents. Elena thought about Adrian's voice in the penthouse hallway. They're sending 4 men. He'd known. He'd tried to stop the relocation. And still this had happened, 6 hours later, through a channel he hadn't known to protect. The immunity for my mother, Elena said. Still valid. It's not changing. But Ms. Marlowe, without Kern's testimony, the financial records alone may not be sufficient for a charging document at the level we need. We need corroboration for the account structures. Kern was the corroboration. How much does that set back the timeline? Significantly. Weeks, possibly more. Elena heard something. A door somewhere above her in the stairwell, not opening. Just the sound of air pressure changing. She listened. Nothing followed. Does Rourke know? She said. Rourke's team is the one managing the Pilsen scene. He'll have told Adrian by now. Adrian doesn't know about the agents. The officer-down situation. He will soon. Elena thought about what 48 hours meant now. What the brunch table above her meant. What Victor had looked like pouring her coffee with a smile that showed all his teeth. He knew, Elena said, last night. At the penthouse. He already knew the safe house location. We're operating on that assumption, yes. Which means he knew before last night. He knew before my mother's name. Before I walked out with the folders. Before any of it. He had already moved on Kern. It's possible the Kern operation was already in motion before last night's dinner. It's not possible. It's certain. Elena pressed her palm against the concrete, cold and rough and absolutely real. Victor sat across from me this morning and ate eggs and talked about centerpieces, and he already knew his people had taken a federal witness. Dines was quiet for a moment. Ms. Marlowe, I need to ask you something directly. Ask. Is there any possibility that Adrian knew about the Pilsen location being compromised and did not tell you? Stairwell is very quiet. I don't know, Elena says, because it was the honest answer. And because she had made herself a rule about honest answers in hard moments, ever since she was old enough to understand that comfortable lies had a longer half-life than people thought. I need you to find out, Dines said. She went back to the brunch table. She ate a small amount of pastry she tasted nothing of. She smiled at Victor twice more and declined a second cup of coffee. She watched Adrian, who was watching his phone under the table, and she watched the exact moment his face changed. The moment Rourke's message reached him. Probably the moment he learned what she had already learned 12 minutes ago. He looked up at her. She gave him nothing. She kept the smile where it was. When Victor excused himself to take a call in his study, Elena leaned across the table toward Adrian and said, very quietly, stairwell. 3 minutes. He was there in 2. She didn't give him time to speak first. Kern is gone, she said. The safe house was hit this morning. Both agents are missing. Face did something that she watched carefully and completely. The shock on it was real. She had seen Adrian Voss control his face in difficult moments, and she knew the difference between performed surprise and actual shock. This was actual. Whatever else was true, he had not known the safe house had been hit. But that was not the same as not knowing it could be. When, he said, overnight. Before 6 a.m. Rourke just texted me a location. He said there was an incident at the Pilsen address. It's more than an incident. His jaw tightened. How much more? The agents are unaccounted for. She watched him absorb that. Adrian. How did Victor know the address? He didn't. Rourke's operation was completely, how did he know? Think. He was quiet for a moment, thinking, and she could see him working through it. The sequence of events and contacts and people, the way you retrace a route, looking for where you made a wrong turn. She watched his eyes. They were moving fast, tracking something internal. Kern used a personal phone once, he said, 6 weeks ago. Told him not to. He said it was to call his daughter. It was 3 minutes. I let it go. Victor has the cell carriers. Victor has everything. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye, the cut above his brow. 6 weeks. He's had 6 weeks to identify the location and plan a move and wait for the right moment. The right moment being the night of the rehearsal dinner. While everyone was occupied. While I was occupied. He dropped his hand. His face was doing something exhausted and furious in equal measure. He planned around me. He knew I'd be at the dinner. He knew my attention would be divided. He let me believe I had more time than I did, and he used that. He looked at her directly. This is my fault. We can distribute fault later, Elena said. Right now I need to know what we have without Kern. The routing records, the account structures. But without Kern's testimony to explain the transaction logic. Dines told you. She told me. Weeks, maybe more. We don't have weeks. No, we don't. She kept her voice even. Victor is sitting 1 floor above us, and he has already moved against a federal witness and 2 federal agents, and he is going to look across the table at me on Saturday and expect me to say vows. And I am going to run out of time before I run out of performance. He looked at her. There's another way. Tell me. There's a second accountant. Not someone I've been working, but someone who left the organization in 2020. His name is Russell Calder. He was the controller before Kern. If Kern can't testify, Calder's knowledge of the pre-2018 account structures might be enough to bridge the gap. Where is he, Tampa? I've had his contact information for 8 months. I haven't approached him because I didn't want to widen the circle. The circle is already blown. I know. Can Rourke approach him today? Maybe. If Calder will talk. He left the organization voluntarily. He wasn't forced out. He may not want any part of this. He may not have a choice, Elena said. If Victor finds out we're still building, he'll reach Calder before we do. Adrian nodded. He pulled out his phone. I'll call Rourke now. Do it from outside, not here. She put her hand on his arm briefly. Not warmly, just the mechanical pressure of someone preventing a mistake. And Adrian, if there is anything else you haven't told me, anything else in this operation that could go wrong, any other contact who could be compromised, any other thread Victor could pull, tell me now. Not later, not when it becomes a problem now. He met her eyes. The hollow book, he said, in the study on the North Shore. Your mother's agreement. What about it? I need it out of there before Victor sends someone. He doesn't know I have copies of his financial records, he thinks. What you took last night was from his penthouse study. But the North Shore house, if he starts pulling on threads and that address comes up, he'd find his own document and know exactly how much we have. Yes. She thought for 3 seconds. Mrs. Farrow, she said. The housekeeper. She's loyal to me, not to Victor. Is she loyal enough to remove a book from a shelf and put it somewhere else without asking questions? He hesitated. I think so. Think or no? No. She's known about the study for 2 years. She's never mentioned it to anyone. Call her before you call Rourke. Tell her to move the book to her own quarters. Don't tell her what's in it. Elena opened the stairwell door. I'm going back upstairs. Give me 20 minutes and then come back in. Separately. She went back to the table. Victor was not yet back from his call. She poured herself the second cup of coffee she'd declined earlier and sat with it and thought about Russell Calder in Tampa and David Kern in a location she could not name, and 2 federal agents who were somewhere that was not the Pilsen safe house, and she thought about how a plan that had seemed extremely fragile 12 hours ago now seemed, in retrospect, to have been optimistic. Victor returned to the table at noon. He sat down, refilled his own coffee, looked at her across the table with the expression of a man about to ask something he already knows the answer to. Your mother, he said. Is she feeling better this morning? She seemed unwell last night. She's fine, Elena said. She gets overwhelmed at large gatherings. She's been that way since my father died. Of course. A pause. 12 years now, isn't it? 15. Time moves. He stirred his coffee. You know, your father and I had a real respect for each other. I want you to know that. Whatever you may have inferred from certain documents, the relationship was genuinely collegial. I'm sure it was, Elena said. He was a man who understood the importance of commitment, of following through. He was, she agreed. I got that from him. Victor looked at her for a moment with his coffee halfway to his lips. Then he smiled, small and private, and drank. Adrian came back to the table 4 minutes later. He sat down without looking at Elena. He exchanged a few words with Victor about the Saturday arrangements. His voice was steady. His hands, she noticed, were not entirely. Victor noticed, too, she could see him noticing the slight recalibration in his attention. He was reading Adrian the same way she was. They were all reading each other across this table, with its good coffee and its pastry crumbs. 3 people performing ordinary conversation on top of a structure that was rotting through from beneath. Text from Dines came at 1:17 p.m. Elena was in the car, alone, having left the brunch on the pretext of an afternoon appointment. The text read, Calder is not in Tampa. He moved 8 weeks ago. We're running the new address. Will advise. 8 weeks ago. 6 weeks since Kern's phone call. 2 weeks before that, someone in Victor's organization had already known enough to locate the man who'd controlled their accounts before Kern. Victor hadn't just moved on Kern. He'd moved on Calder first quietly, relocating the threat without eliminating it, which was somehow more terrifying than the alternative, because it meant he'd been anticipating this scenario for 2 months. Her phone rang. It was not Dines. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered it, Miss Marlowe, a man's voice. Older. Careful. My name is Russell Calder. I believe some people are looking for me. She sat very still. How did you get this number? Adrian Voss gave it to me. About 8 months ago. He said, if I ever needed to reach someone I could trust outside his immediate circle, that I should call you. Elena closed her eyes for about 2 seconds. Adrian had given this man her number 8 months ago, before she knew anything, before the ring in the drawer, before the ledger, before any of it, and had not told her. She processed this and set it aside for the separate conversation she had promised herself. Where are you? She said. I'd rather not say on a call. Smart, can you meet? That's why I called. A pause. I've been waiting for this to move for 8 months, Miss Marlowe. I know what Victor Voss has been doing for 15 years. I know the account structures from 2010 through 2020. I know the names, the transfers, the offshore mechanics, all of it. Kept records because I knew someday someone would ask. Calder. She kept her voice steady. Are you somewhere safe right now? For the moment. Stay there. Don't move. I'm going to give you a number for a federal agent named Dines. Call her directly and tell her exactly what you just told me. Can you do that? Yes. But Ms. Marlowe, he stopped. She heard something in the pause, some calculation happening. Victor knows I have records. I moved 2 months ago because someone came asking questions at my Tampa address. They didn't find me, but they were close. I know. We're aware. Then you understand that if I step forward, if I give testimony, he'll know exactly who closed the case on him. And he's not a man who accepts that without a response. He'll be in federal custody before he can respond. That's what the last person who said that to me thought too. A pause. I'm not saying I won't do it. I'm saying I need it done fast and clean. I've been waiting 8 months. I'm not waiting another 8. Give me 48 hours, she said, and then heard her own words and almost laughed. 48 hours, Calder said. All right. She gave him Dines's number and hung up. She sat in the car and pressed the back of her head against the headrest. She thought about what Dines had said about the timeline weeks, possibly more, and what Calder had just said about records going back to 2010, the pre-2018 account structures, the offshore mechanics. Calder was not the bridge over Kern's absence. Calder was the entire foundation. If Calder's records were what he claimed, and his testimony held under cross-examination, the routing records she'd photographed became corroboration rather than primary evidence, which was exactly the reversal they needed. Calder had been found once and nearly found twice. And every hour she sat in this car was an hour Victor had to find him again. Called Adrian. Calder called me, she said when he answered. Pause. He was supposed to call Rourke if he called me, because you gave him my number 8 months ago. Another pause. Longer this time. Adrian. I know. You gave a protected witness my personal number without telling me. I needed a failsafe. If something happened to my line of contact with Rourke, I needed Calder to have somewhere to go. You were the most stop. She heard her own voice, flat and cold, and recognized it as the voice she used in her most difficult client meetings, the one that came out when she had run out of capacity for anything except the immediate necessity. Tell me everything right now. Every contact, every failsafe. Every person in this operation who has my name, my number, or my address. Every single one. The silence before he answered was the length of a man deciding whether honesty was still useful. There's one more, he said. The third person was a woman named Iris Lamb, a former financial analyst from Harrow Capital who had left the company in 2019 after witnessing a transaction she couldn't account for and who had subsequently been quietly surveilled by 2 of Victor's men for approximately 18 months. Adrian had identified her through a contact at the company, approached her 18 months ago, and spent 6 months convincing her to document what she'd seen. She had. She had given him a signed statement and her own copies of internal documents that corroborated the post-2018 account structures from the inside. He had listed Elena as her emergency contact without telling Elena. The reason he had not told Elena was that when he'd done it, they had been dating for 2 months, and he had not yet decided how much she knew about his family or how much he was going to tell her. He had made a calculation that her name, used only in a worst-case scenario, was a low-risk protection for Iris. That calculation, Elena said, was made about me without my knowledge or consent. Yes. I was a resource you used before you knew if you could trust me. Elena, I'm not asking for an apology right now. I'm asking, does Victor know about Iris? Not as of 3 months ago. As of this morning? A pause that she felt in her back teeth. I don't know. Where is she, Chicago? Wicker Park. She's not in a safe house. She's just living her life, which is part of why she stayed under the radar. She doesn't look protected because she isn't, formally. Call her, right now, while I'm on the line. Tell her to leave her apartment immediately and go somewhere else. Don't tell her more than she needs to know. She heard him switch to another line. She sat in the car and waited, and looked at the street outside and counted the people on it, a habit she'd had since she was a child, the compulsive counting of strangers as a way of measuring the density of the normal world. She got to 11 before Adrian came back. She didn't answer, he said. The air in the car felt suddenly thin. Call again, she said. He did. It rang through. I'm going to her apartment, he said. Adrian, if Victor has her. If Victor has her, you cannot go to her apartment. I can't just to me. She kept her voice at a level that required him to listen carefully. If Victor has Iris, he knows about her records, which means he knows the scope of what we're building, which means the 48-hour window is already closed. She pressed her hands against the steering wheel. Call Dines. Call Rourke. Give them the Wicker Park address. Let them go. They'll take 20 minutes. Then it takes 20 minutes. You going there alone is not a solution. He was quiet. She could hear him breathing. The wedding is tomorrow, he said. I know. Victor will expect me to be there, I know. Iris is stopped, if he has her. If he has her records. He knows we have enough to file. He won't wait for the wedding. No, she said. He won't. The understanding of that settled between them through the phone like weather changing. Dines needs to know about Calder and Iris both, she said. Right now. Everything. The full picture. No more partial information. Can you do that? Yes, and Adrian. She looked at the street. Is there anything else? Anyone else? Any other failsafe? Any other contact? Any other person in this city who's subjected to this operation and whose connection to you I don't know about? Pause was short this time. No, he said. That's everything. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why, given the accumulation of the past 12 hours. But she believed him. Then go somewhere Victor's people aren't watching. I'll call you from Dines's office. She hung up and started the car. She was 3 blocks from the federal field office when the call came from her mother. She answered it through the car speaker. Mom, are you all right? Her mother's voice was not the voice of the previous night's calm, practiced grief. Quieter than that. Quieter and more compressed. The voice of someone speaking carefully because someone else is in the room. I'm fine, her mother said. I just wanted to let you know that Victor stopped by this morning. Elena's hands went rigid on the wheel. He stopped by, she repeated. Yes, just briefly. He wanted to give me something. A gift, he said. For the mother of the bride, a pause. He was very gracious about it. He said he wanted me to know how welcome I was in the family. What did he give you? A photo frame, silver. Very beautiful. Another pause carefully timed, with a photograph of your father inside it. One I'd never seen before. Your father with Victor, arm in arm, at some kind of dinner. Elena pulled over. He was making a point, her mother said. Her voice was entirely steady now. Steady the way ice is steady before it cracks. He wanted me to know that he knew, that he was paying attention. That she stopped. Elena. He sat in my living room for 25 minutes, and he was perfectly pleasant, and he never said a single threatening thing, and I have never been more frightened in my life. I know, Mom. He knows I spoke to someone. He may not know who, but he knows. The way he looked at that photograph when he handed it to me. Listen to me. Are you still at home? Yes, leave. Right now, take nothing important, just your keys and your phone and your coat, and go to Diane Torres's apartment. Do not tell Diane why. Do not call me from that address once you're there. I will find you when it's safe. Elena, Mom, please, go now, a silence. Then the sound of a chair moving, her mother's footsteps a door. I'm going, her mother said. Don't hang up until you're in the car. She listened to her mother move through the apartment, down the hall, out the front door. She listened to the sound of a key in a lock, and then the sound of October air, open and unmistakable, and then a car door. I'm in, her mother said. Go. I'll find you. She hung up and sat on the pulled-over street with the engine running and thought, with the clarity that was indistinguishable from its opposite, about what Victor Voss had just done. He had not threatened her mother. He had visited her. He had given her a gift. He had sat in her living room for 25 minutes, being perfectly pleasant. And in doing so, he had communicated, without a single actionable word, that he was aware, that he was watching, that the photograph of her dead husband was a message about what knowledge meant and who held it. It was the action of a man who had already decided the wedding was not happening and was covering his exposure before the collapse. He wasn't waiting for Saturday. She was inside the federal building at 2:41 p.m. Dines was a compact woman in her mid-40s. With reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on, and she had the specific energy of someone who had been running on insufficient sleep for several consecutive days and had made peace with it. She looked at Elena across a desk covered in organized stacks of paper and said, Calder called. His records are extensive. I've got 2 analysts on it now. Victor visited my mother this morning. Dines's glasses came off. At her home. Sat with her for 25 minutes. No threats, a photograph of her dead husband. Elena set her bag down. He knows the operation is compromised. He may not know the full scope, but he knows enough to start managing his exposure, which means he'll move the money. He's probably already started. Elena sat. How long to freeze the accounts? With Calder's records as a basis, Rourke can file for an emergency asset freeze by end of day. If the judge approves and with what Calder is describing, I believe he will. We can have the accounts locked within 24 hours. She paused. But Ms. Marlowe, if we file for that freeze, Victor will know by morning. He has people in enough places that something this size will get back to him. He knows already. He's just finishing his preparations. Then we're racing the same clock. What about Iris Lamb? Dines put her glasses back on. Our agents reached the Wicker Park address 40 minutes ago. The apartment was empty. Her neighbor said she left this morning with a suitcase. The neighbor said a man had been sitting in a car across the street for the past 2 days, and this morning the car was gone. Victor had not taken Iris Lamb. He'd simply made her run, which meant she was somewhere in the city or beyond it with her records and her signed statement and a fear that was going to make her very difficult to reach. Can you find her? Elena said. We're trying. Her phone is off. She'll surface. She's scared, not suicidal. She kept those records for a reason. Elena pressed her fingertips together. What do we have that's actionable right now today? Without Kern and without Iris. Dines pulled a folder. Calder's documentation covers the account structures from 2010 to 2020. Your photographs of the routing records from the North Shore study cover 2018 forward. They overlap for 2 years, which is stronger than either alone. The offshore transfer sequence is traceable through 4 jurisdictions, and Calder can explain the mechanism. She set the folder down. It's not the airtight case I wanted, but it's a case. Then file, Elena said. Dines looked at her. Once we file, everything moves. Victor will know within hours. Your position, yours and Adrian's. File, Elena said. My position changes when my mother is safe and the accounts are frozen. Right now, neither of those things is true, and every hour we wait is an hour Victor spends making the case harder. There's one more variable, Dines said. She slid a single page across the desk. Elena picked it up. It was a photograph. Security camera, high angle, grainy in the way of footage that has been enhanced past its resolution limit. Parking structure. 2 figures near a car. The timestamp read 6:14 a.m. that morning, while Elena was practicing her smile in the bathroom mirror. One figure she didn't recognize. The other was Adrian. The car they were standing beside was not Adrian's. This is from the structure adjacent to the Pilsen safe house, Dines said. Her voice was careful in a way Elena had learned to register as significant. 40 minutes before our agents discovered the house was empty. We've identified the second figure as a known associate of Victor's organization. Elena set the photograph down. She looked at it. She picked it up and looked at it again, not because it changed, but because she needed to be certain she was seeing, and not what the past 36 sleepless hours were making her see. Adrian was at the Pilsen safe house, she said. This morning. He was in the vicinity, Dines said. 40 minutes before we found it empty. He told me he didn't know it had been hit until Rourke texted him. He may have been there for reasons unrelated to Minets. Stop. Elena put the photograph down face up on the desk. Don't cushion it. What's your read? Dines was quiet for 3 seconds. I don't know. It's possible he was there trying to protect Kern. Possible he was there for another reason entirely. Possible the timing is coincidental. She met Elena's eyes. It's also possible that someone in Victor's organization knew the Pilsen address because Adrian gave it to them. The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Elena thought about Adrian's face in the stairwell. The genuine shock. She thought about what genuine shock looked like on a man who was also capable of keeping Iris Lam's name and her own name in the same operational file for 8 months without disclosure. She thought about the ring in the drawer kept as a reminder of what the family did to people who tried to leave, and whether a man who needed that kind of reminder was a man who had fully left, or a man who was still negotiating the distance. She thought about the stairwell, the 22 minutes it had taken him to reach her apartment when she'd said now. 22 minutes, not 30. Like he'd already been closer than he'd said. I need to speak to Adrian, she said. Ms. Marlowe. Dines's voice was measured. If there's any possibility that he's been feeding information to Victor's side, you cannot, mates. I know. She stood up. I also know that if I cut contact with him now, Victor will notice. And if Victor notices, everything we're holding together for the next 24 hours falls apart before Rourke can file. She picked up her bag. I need to look at him when I ask him about this photograph. And if his answer isn't the one you're hoping for. Elena looked at the photograph one more time. Adrian's profile, grainy and overexposed, in a parking structure at 6 in the morning, standing beside a car that belonged to someone from Victor Voss's organization. Then I stop hoping, she said, and I finish this without him. 4. Everything that breaks. She found him in his car outside her apartment building. He was sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off, hands on the wheel, not going anywhere, just sitting there like a man who had run out of places to drive. The October light was going gray by late afternoon, and it made him look older than he was. The bruise under his eye gone purple now, the cut above his brow scabbed over. He'd been there a while. She could tell from the set of his shoulders, the specific kind of stillness that comes from sitting in one position too long without deciding to leave. She got in the passenger side. She put the photograph on the dashboard. He looked at it for about 4 seconds. His hands came off the wheel. 6 this morning, she said. Pilsen parking structure. 40 minutes before the safe house was found empty. He didn't touch the photograph. He looked at it the way you look at something you've been waiting to arrive and hoped wouldn't. His name is Garrett Munn, Adrian said. He worked for my father for 9 years. Came to me 8 weeks ago. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Came to you. He said he wanted out. That he'd seen enough and he wanted to give me information in exchange for help getting clear of the organization. He exhaled slowly. I was suspicious. I ran it for 3 weeks before I decided he was legitimate. He gave me the Calder relocation address. He told me Victor had moved Calder 2 months before the Tampa surveillance. So Munn was your inside source? Yes. And you didn't tell Rourke? I didn't tell anyone. I didn't trust the channel yet. Did you tell Munn about the Pilsen address? The pause before his answer was exactly the length of a man being honest about something he knows will cost him. I told him Kern was protected in a South Side location. I didn't give him the specific address. He turned to look at her. Elena, I swear to you I did not give him the address. But you gave him enough to narrow it. I didn't know he was still running information to Victor. You thought wrong. She kept her voice level, not because she felt level, but because the alternative was something she couldn't afford right now. In this car, with everything still moving. Victor turned your inside source and used him to find Kern. And you were in that parking structure this morning because Munn called you. He called me at 5:30. He said he'd found out what happened to the safe house, that he wanted to warn me, that we needed to talk before. He pulled you to the scene. She pressed her palm against her thigh. He made sure you were visible on camera. So if anyone pulled that footage, you'd be the story instead of Victor. Adrian closed his eyes for about 2 seconds. When he opened them, they were hard and clear, the way eyes get when the person behind them has finished being surprised and started being furious at themselves. He set me up, he said. Victor set you up. Munn was the instrument. She picked up the photograph from the dashboard and put it in her bag. Dines has this. She had a question about your loyalties. I told her I needed to look at you when I asked. And I'm looking. He held her gaze. He didn't try to make it easier with an expression. He just held it, which was the right thing to do, and she registered that. I didn't give him the address, he said again. Not defensive, just factual. I believe you. She reached for the door handle, which means we still have a problem, because Dines has that photograph, and if she decides it changes the immunity calculations, I'll talk to her. You'll talk to her now. Come with me. She opened the door. And Adrian. Munn. Does he know about Calder's contact with me? About my mother's statement? He was already getting out of the car. I don't know what Victor told him to find out. Then we assume he knows everything, she said. And we move like we're already out of time. They were in Dines's office at 4:15 p.m. Adrian put his version of the Munn situation on the table without being asked to, complete and sequential. The way you give information when you understand that partial disclosure is now more dangerous than the whole truth. Dines listened without interrupting, her glasses off, and in her hand, tapping them once against her palm at the point in the story where Munn had called at 5:30 in the morning. When he finished, she said, "The photograph doesn't change the immunity arrangement. But I need Munn, he'll run," Adrian said. Maybe. But if Victor used him to compromise the Pilsen operation, Munn has exposure on a federal level. He might prefer our deal to Victor's loyalty. She put her glasses on. Where does he think you are right now? I haven't responded to his last message. Good. Keep it that way. She turned to Rourke, who had been in the corner of the room throughout, arms crossed, expression neutral in the way of a man who had already factored this into his calculations and arrived at an answer he was keeping to himself. The asset freeze, she said. Rourke uncrossed his arms. Filed at 4. The judge is considering it now. He looked at his watch. We should have an answer within the hour. And when Victor finds out, Elena said, he'll move, Rourke said simply. Whatever assets he can shift before the freeze takes hold. And he paused. He'll manage his exposure. People who know too much tend to get managed. My mother, Elena said. She's at a secondary location, Dine said. We have a car outside. She doesn't know there's a car outside. No, but it's there. Elena looked at Rourke. What's Victor's move when the freeze hits? In your assessment, what does he do? Rourke considered it for about 3 seconds, which for a man like him was a long time. He burns the evidence he can reach, and he secures leverage over the people he can't burn. Which means he comes for someone he can use, Elena said. That's my read, Rourke said. And the most useful person he can reach right now, the one whose cooperation or incapacitation changes the shape of the case most significantly. Is Adrian, Elena said. Is you, Rourke said. The asset freeze was approved at 5:47 p.m. Dines got the confirmation on her phone and showed it to Rourke without showing it to Elena or Adrian first, which Elena noted, and then showed them both. The document was 3 pages. Elena read it in 45 seconds and handed it back. How long before he knows, Adrian said. He probably already does, Rourke said. His financial people watch those accounts. The moment the freeze hits the system, an alert goes somewhere. Could be automated. Could be a contact inside the institution. He looked at his phone. We need to move your position. Both of you. I'm not going to a safe house, Elena said. Ms. Marlowe, I have things left to do tonight. She looked at Dines. Iris Lamb, what's the status? Still no contact. She's in the city. She left with a suitcase, which means she had somewhere to go. Elena pulled out her own phone. She has my name as an emergency contact. Adrian set that up, which means if she calls an emergency contact, she calls me, as she called. Not yet, but she will. She pocketed the phone. I'll stay mobile. I'll keep contact every 30 minutes. But I'm not sitting in a safe house while Victor decides his next move. Dines and Rourke exchanged a look that contained an entire professional disagreement, compressed into about half a second. We'll have a car with you, Dines said, at a distance. At a reasonable distance. Elena nodded. She turned to Adrian. What does Victor do when he's cornered? He was quiet for a moment. He narrows his focus. Everything that isn't essential becomes expendable. He identifies the one thing that can still salvage his position, and he goes for it directly. He met her eyes. That's what he's doing right now. Identifying the one thing. What's the one thing, me? Adrian said. If he brings me back into the organization, if he can demonstrate that I was working for him, that the information passed to the FBI was a controlled leak under his direction, it reframes the entire investigation. It makes Calder's testimony circumstantial. It creates enough reasonable doubt to stall the case for years. He'd claim you were his asset. He has documents that could be read that way. Parking structure photograph. The way I structured the Mun contact. The fact that I kept copies of his financial records in a house he technically still owns. He said it without affect. Just the clinical description of a trap that had been assembled around him, piece by piece. He's been building a parallel story about me for months, in case he needed it. And if he gets you in a room, Elena said. He doesn't need much time. A conversation that's recorded. Something that looks like I'm still reporting to him. Something he can give to his attorneys that creates noise. He paused. He'll offer me a choice. Come back in or watch everything collapse. And the people around you, she said. Your mother is dead. There's no one else he can use on that side. She heard herself saying it. The flatness of it. Is that right? There's you, he said. He already tried to make you the symbol of loyalty. If he can put you in the same room. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Chicago area code, she answered it. Ms. Marlowe. A woman's voice. Young and tight with a fear that had been held down for a while and was starting to surface. My name is Iris Lamb. I think you've been looking for me. She was in Logan Square, in the apartment of a friend who didn't know why she was there or what she was carrying. She'd taken the blue line from Wicker Park at 7 that morning, and she'd been sitting in her friend's spare room for 10 hours with a laptop and an external hard drive, and a growing certainty that she had made a terrible miscalculation by running instead of calling. Elena told her to stay exactly where she was. She told Dines and Rourke, and watched Rourke dispatch 2 agents to the Logan Square address, with instructions to bring Iris Lamb and her hard drive to the field office quietly. No visible law enforcement presence. Documents, Elena said. She said signed statement and internal records. If they corroborate Calder's timeline on the 2019 accounts, they fill the gap between Kern's absence and what Calder can reach, Dines said. I know. We'll know what she has within the hour. 6:20 p.m., Elena's phone buzzed. Not a call. A text from an unknown number, 4 words. We should talk. Tonight she showed it to Dines. Dines read it. She looked at Elena with an expression that contained a specific kind of calculation. Probably. Elena typed back. About what? She sent it before Dines could suggest otherwise. The response came in 40 seconds. About what you're doing and what it cost you. Elena looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed where Dines's hand came out. Marlowe, he's going to tell me something tonight, Elena said. Whatever his alternative plan is, whatever he's going to offer Adrian, he's going to want me to know about it first, to give me the chance to walk away. She kept her eyes on Dines. I want to know what he thinks he still has. You are not meeting Victor Voss. Not alone. She held up the phone. I'll wire up. You put a team within 200 feet. He says something usable, we use it. He doesn't. I walk out. He has people. He has people everywhere. And so do you. And right now he thinks he's still negotiating. And I want to keep him thinking that for exactly as long as it takes to find out what card he thinks he's holding. She put the phone down. If I don't know what he's planning, I can't anticipate it. And if I can't anticipate it, he moves on Adrian or my mother or Iris Lamb, and we're responding instead of leading. She looked at Rourke. You know I'm right. Rourke looked at Dines. Dines looked at Elena with the expression of a woman evaluating a risk she didn't like against an alternative she liked less. You don't go without a wire, she said. And you don't go without Adrian. He specifically didn't include Adrian in the text. Exactly, Dines said. He wants you separate from Adrian, which is why Adrian goes. The location Victor sent was a restaurant in River North, the kind of place that was expensive enough to be quiet and connected enough to have certain arrangements with certain security systems, or so Rourke assessed when he ran the address. They swept it as best they could in 40 minutes. Dines put 3 agents in the restaurant and 2 outside and a car at the end of the block. Elena wore the wire against her collarbone, under the same cream blouse she'd worn to the brunch because she hadn't had time to go home and change, and in a strange way the repetition felt appropriate, like a shift that was still going. Adrian was beside her in the cab. He hadn't spoken much since the field office. He'd listened, agreed to the plan, and gone quiet in the way he went quiet, when he was working something through that hadn't resolved yet. When we get in there, she said, not looking at him, watching the city out the window, let me lead. I know. If he says something about the parking structure photograph, I'll confirm the Munn version. My way, my words. Don't volunteer it. Only if he brings it up. He waited until she looked at him. I know what I'm doing. You also knew Munn was clean, she said. Not cruelly. Just exact that. Yes, he said. I did. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Victor was already there. He was at a corner table, same bearing as always, unhurried. A glass of red wine in front of him and a small bread plate he hadn't touched. He looked like a man meeting family for dinner, which was the precise kind of violence he specialized in. This ability to make everything ordinary that was not. He stood when they came in. He looked at Adrian with an expression that was too complicated to read in a single pass. I said Elena, he told Adrian. She said me, Adrian said. Victor sat down. He gestured at the chairs opposite him. He sat. A waiter appeared. Neither of them ordered anything. The waiter disappeared with the professional invisibility of someone accustomed to tables where things were happening below the surface. The accounts are frozen, Victor said, not to Elena. To Adrian. I know, Adrian said. 12 years of work. More than that, and you know it. Victor picked up his wine. He looked at it, not them. I built this with my father, and his father before. Do you understand what that means? Not the money, the infrastructure, the network. What it takes to maintain something like that across 3 generations of people who all have their own ambitions and their own fears and their own reasons to defect. I understand exactly what it takes, Adrian said. Why I'm ending it. You're not ending it. Victor's voice dropped. Not louder but lower, the register he used when performance was no longer necessary. You're handing it to people who will use it for their own purposes and call it justice. The difference between what I do and what federal prosecutors do is paperwork. The difference, Adrian said, is that you put names in a ledger, and the people whose names were in that ledger don't get to argue about the difference. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Elena. Your father, he said, died because he was afraid. Not because of anything I did to him. Because he looked at the future and he didn't have the character to face it. He said it without cruelty, which was the cruelest way to say it. You're very different from him. Don't, she said. I'm not insulting him. Don't talk about him, she said. Her voice was steady. The wire against her collarbone felt like a second heartbeat. Tell me what you want. You didn't ask me here to discuss my father. Victor set down his wine. He straightened slightly, a small adjustment, like a man finding his stance before something that matters. The accounts are frozen but not seized. There's a window narrow, probably 48 hours, before the courts can move to formal forfeiture. In that window, certain assets could be restructured through channels the freeze doesn't cover. He looked at Adrian. I need a signature. One document. Your name on a transfer authorization that predates the freeze by 6 months. We tell it as a routine restructuring. The attorneys handle the rest. You want me to backdate a document, Adrian said. I want you to sign something that was already prepared 6 months ago and file it now. That's fraud. That's pragmatism. And in exchange, Adrian said, in exchange, I give your federal friends Garrett Munn on a plate. Full cooperation, full accounting of what he told me and what he helped me do. I make myself the victim of an inside betrayal, and you become the son who helped expose it. He spread his hands, a gesture of arrangement, of everything fitting. Case against me becomes significantly more complicated. Complicated enough, perhaps, for a different outcome. The restaurant was very quiet. Elena could hear the glass against Victor's hand, could hear Adrian's breathing, slow and controlled. And the photograph, Elena said. Victor looked at her. Parking structure, she said. You put your own son in camera range of a compromised federal operations so you'd have leverage over him. Plan this. I plan for contingencies, Victor said, as I always do. Used Munn to take Kern. Used Munn to put Adrian on camera. And now you're offering to give Munn back, as though that's a concession. She kept her hands flat on the table. That's not a deal. That's a trap with a different door. Victor looked at her with something she hadn't seen before. Not amusement, not calculation. Something that was almost acknowledgement. Your father, he said again, but differently this time, would not have had this conversation. No, she said, he wouldn't have. That's the difference between us. Victor turned to Adrian, son. Adrian's jaw tightened at the word. A single muscle, a single tell. Walk out of this with something, Victor said. The organization is damaged, not destroyed. With the right restructuring in 2 years. I'm not restructuring anything, Adrian said. I'm not signing anything. I'm not walking out of this with something. He looked at his father, and what was in his face was not anger anymore, was not the hot, sharp thing it had been for the past 2 days. It was something that had cooled down into a decision. I'm done. Whatever that costs. It costs everything, Victor said. The name, the money. I know what it costs. Then you've chosen her over... I've chosen myself, Adrian said, for the first time. Stop making it about Elena. Victor was silent. The waiter reappeared. Victor looked at him and made a small gesture, and the waiter went away again. Then Victor reached into his jacket pocket and placed a phone on the table. Screen was on. There was an audio file on it, playing from the beginning, and Elena needed about 4 seconds to recognize the voices, her own and her mother's. From the call last night at 1:30 in the morning, when she'd told her mother to go to Diane Torres's apartment. The cold that moved through her chest was fast and total. You were on my mother's phone, she said. I was on your mother's network, Victor said quietly, as I have been for 11 years. It was part of the original arrangement. He picked up the phone and stopped the playback. Diane Torres, on Greenview Avenue in Rogers Park. He put the phone in his pocket. Your mother is there right now. And there's a car outside that doesn't belong to federal law enforcement. Elena was on her feet before she knew she'd moved. Victor raised one hand, not grabbing her, just raising it, a gesture of stop. Sit down, he said. Same tone as the night before. Same penthouse, different restaurant. Same absolute quiet assurance of a man who had never in his life been told no and had stopped expecting it. He's fine. She'll stay fine. But I need Adrian's signature on that document, and I need it in night. If you touch my mother, Elena said. I haven't touched anyone. I've simply identified a location. He looked at Adrian. The document takes 5 minutes. The authorization is already written. You sign it, I call off the car, your federal friends get Munn, and build whatever case they can from what remains. Everyone walks away from tonight. Adrian was standing now, too. His hands were at his sides. The bruise under his eye had gone almost black in the restaurant light, and he looked like he'd taken a blow and was still on his feet processing whether to fall. The wire, he said quietly. To Elena, not a question. Yes, she said. They heard everything. Yes. He looked at her for about 2 seconds. Then he looked at his father. You've got a car outside Diane Torres's apartment, And you just admitted it into a federal recording. Victor's expression did not change immediately. He processed. She watched him process. It took about 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, something in his face moved from certainty into something that was not quite uncertainty, but was its border. That's extortion of a federal witness, Adrian said. That's a separate charge from everything else. That's you personally, not the organization. Not the accounts, not the shell companies. Victor said nothing. Call off the car, Adrian said. Adrian, call it off. His voice was not loud. It had gone to the same quiet register Victor used when performance was finished. Like father, like son, Elena thought, and felt sick at the thought. You're already done. The accounts are frozen. Calder is talking to federal attorneys right now. You've just added a charge to a case that was already complete. He looked at his father. Call it off and tell me where Kern is. Kern is. Where is he? The restaurant held its breath. Victor Voss looked at his son across a table in a quiet restaurant in River North on a Thursday evening, with 3 federal agents inside and 2 outside, and a wire transmitting everything to a receiver 200 feet away, and for the first time in Elena's observation of him, he looked like a man who had reached the end of his preparations and found nothing behind them. Took out his phone. He made a call that lasted 11 seconds. Put the phone away. Kern is at a property in Bridgeport, he said, unharmed. I'll give you the address. He looked at Adrian one last time with an expression that was too old and too complicated to be just anger or just grief, some mixture of both that had been sitting in him since before tonight. Your grandfather would be. Don't, Adrian said. Victor stopped. Outside the restaurant, Elena could hear the city, the ordinary noise of it, traffic and distance, and the October wind coming off the lake. She could feel her own heartbeat in her throat, and the wire against her collarbone, and her mother's voice on Victor's phone, saying the door would be open, and she thought, with a cold and total clarity, that whatever happened next, the next 5 minutes, would determine everything that came after. Her phone lit up on the table where she'd set it when she sat down. Dines, she answered it. We have the car outside Torres's address, Dines said. 2 men were moving on them now, a pause, and Ms. Marlowe Iris Lamb is here. Her records go back to 2017. The overlap with Calder is complete. Another pause. And then, in a voice that was as close to satisfied as a federal agent allows herself in the middle of an operation, we have enough. Elena looked at Victor Voss. You heard that, she said. He had. He picked up his wine glass and finished what was in it, a slow and deliberate gesture, the last voluntary action of a man who had run out of voluntary actions, and then he set the glass down and folded his hands on the table and looked at the space between them, and said nothing at all. Adrian's hand found Elena's on the table. Not romantic, not possessive, just contact. One person to another, both of them still standing. She didn't pull away. Rourke came through the restaurant door at 8:44 p.m. with 2 agents behind him, and the night outside was very dark. And somewhere in Bridgeport, a man named David Kern was still alive. And the case that had taken 2 years and cost more than either of them had agreed to pay was at last complete enough to end. Part 5, What Remains. Victor Voss did not say another word in the restaurant. He sat with his hands folded on the table while Rourke read him his rights in a voice that was professionally flat. The voice of a man who has done this many times and understands that ceremony matters even when no one in the room feels ceremonial. One of the agents produced handcuffs. Victor stood for them without being asked, which Elena registered as the last performance of a man who had spent 63 years controlling how he appeared in every room he occupied. He would not be seen struggling. He would not give anyone the image of Victor Voss resisting. He would walk out of this restaurant the way he'd walked into every room of his life, composed, unhurried, looking like the most dangerous person present, probably still was. That didn't change with handcuffs. At the door he stopped, just briefly, and looked back at Adrian. Adrian was still standing at the table, one hand loose at his side, the other on the back of a chair. He looked back at his father, and his face was doing nothing that Elena could name not triumph, not grief, not relief. Just a kind of absolute exhaustion that had settled into his features like weather that had been coming for a long time and had finally arrived. Victor looked at him for about 4 seconds. Then he looked away and walked through the door and into the night. And that was the last time Elena saw them in the same room. The restaurant exhaled. Somewhere behind her, a glass clinked against a table. The waiter reappeared, looked at the space where Victor had been, looked at Rourke's badge, and retreated again with the practiced neutrality of a man who had decided not to have an opinion about whatever had just happened. Adrian pulled the chair out and sat down heavily, like his legs had been making a decision about this for a while and had finally settled it. Elena sat across from him. Neither of them spoke for about a minute. The wire was still against her collarbone. She reached inside her blouse and unclipped it and set it on the table, a small black rectangle that had recorded the last 40 minutes of Victor Voss's operational life. "Kern," she said finally, "Rourke has a team going to the Bridgeport address now." His voice was rough in a way it hadn't been earlier, the roughness of a man who has been holding his voice at a certain register for too long. "He'll be fine. Victor needed him alive for exactly the reason we thought as leverage in case the case moved. And Munn. They'll pick him up tonight." He pressed his thumb against the tablecloth, a small pressing motion, back and forth. "He'll deal. He always deals." Elena looked at the wire on the table. She thought about how the night had gone, and what it had required from both of them and what was left now that the requiring was over. The answer was not clean. The answer was a restaurant table with breadcrumbs on it, and a man with a purple bruise under his eye, and 48 hours of not sleeping, and her mother in Rogers Park, not knowing that a car outside had just been removed by federal agents. "I need to call my mother," she said. "Go." She stepped away from the table. She went to a corner of the restaurant near the coat check, where the noise was lowest, and called her mother's cell. Her mother answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, with the calibrated calm of a woman who had been calm on purpose all day and was very tired of it. "Is it over?" her mother said. "The arrest happened 20 minutes ago. You can go home." A silence, then. "Are you all right?" Elena leaned her shoulder against the wall. The plaster was cool through her blouse. "I don't know yet," she said. "I will be. Your father would." Her mother stopped. Started again differently. "He would have been proud of how you handled this. He also would have told me I shouldn't have needed to handle it." "Yes," her mother said quietly. "He would have said that too." They stayed on the line for a moment without speaking, which was its own kind of conversation, kind they'd been having since Elena was a child and her mother had run out of words that were adequate and had learned to let the silence carry the rest. "I'll come by tomorrow," Elena said. "We'll talk about everything properly. All of it. The things you didn't tell me, and the things I should have asked sooner. That'll be a long conversation, I know." "I'll make coffee," her mother said. The next several hours were procedural in the way that the aftermath of large events always is the machinery of institutions, grinding through what the human moments have produced. Rourke's team reached the Bridgeport property at 9:22 p.m. and found David Kern in a basement room with a space heater and a cot, and 11 days of Sudoku books, unharmed in the physical sense, frightened in ways that would take longer to account for. He was transported to the field office. He asked immediately for his attorney and a cup of coffee, and whether the Cubs had won anything since October 3rd, which was the last date he could confirm. Iris Lamb gave her statement in a conference room at the field office with Dines across the table and a court reporter at the end, and her hard drive connected to a federal laptop. The statement took 2 hours and 40 minutes. When it was done, she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and looked at Dines and said, "Is it enough?" Dines said yes. Iris Lamb put her face in her hands and cried for about 90 seconds, the compressed crying of someone releasing something that has been held at pressure for a very long time, and then she wiped her face and asked where the bathroom was. Russell Calder's records, cross-referenced with Iris Lamb's documentation, and Elena's photographs, built an evidentiary structure that the federal attorneys described carefully and without superlatives as comprehensive. 12 years of Voss organization financial operations, from the offshore mechanics to the domestic shell companies to the infrastructure fund arrangements that had first brought Paul Marlowe into the circle. The charging document ran to 63 pages. Victor Voss was processed, arraigned, and remanded without bail by midnight, a federal judge having reviewed the asset freeze application and the preliminary charges and determined that a man with his resources and his passport represented an unacceptable flight risk. Elena knew none of this in real time. She was home by 10:30, alone, having parted from Adrian outside the restaurant, with an exchange that was brief and careful and contained everything that needed to not be said tonight. "Get some sleep," she'd told him. "You too," he'd said. And then he'd looked at her the way he'd looked at her 100 times over the past 14 months, and the look had been the same as always, steady, watchful, something behind it that was too complicated for the surface, except that tonight she knew what was behind it, and it was still complicated, and it was not going to resolve itself in a parking lot at 9 p.m., after the night they'd just had. She went home. She took a shower that lasted longer than she intended. She stood under the hot water and thought about her father in a filing cabinet where he kept everything in plain sight, and about a chess game when she was 8 where he didn't let her win, and about a ledger with his name in faded ink, and a word beside it that she was going to have to learn to live with, the way you learn to live with things that don't have clean answers. Not forgetting them. Just locating them in a part of yourself that isn't the front room, and closing the door on most days, and knowing on the other days that the door is there and what it leads to. She went to bed at 11:15. She slept without dreaming, which was either mercy or exhaustion, and she didn't try to figure out which. The morning after was a Saturday. The morning that was supposed to be her wedding day was a Saturday in October, with cold light coming through her apartment windows, and no dress in a garment bag, and no flowers at a venue, and no 350 envelopes. She lay in bed for a few minutes after she woke and let that settle. The absence of all those things felt, she expected, like it should feel like loss. What it actually felt like was air. Like a room that had been too full for too long had finally been cleared out and she was standing in it, figuring out what she actually wanted in it. She got up. She made coffee. She drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking at the street below, the Saturday morning version of it, slower than the weekday version. Different people, different purposes. Counted 12 before she caught herself counting and stopped. Her phone had 23 messages. She read 3 of them, one from Dines confirming the arraignment, one from Rourke with a summary of overnight developments, one from Diane Torres that read, "Call me when you're alive," and I mean that in every possible sense. She put the phone face down and finished her coffee. Then she went to see her mother. Margaret Marlowe's apartment in Evanston was the apartment of a woman who had arranged her life around the appearance of stability so long that the stability had become real, mostly. Neat without being sterile. Evidence of a person who read actual books and watered actual plants and had made quietly and without anyone noticing. A life that belonged to her, rather than to the agreement her dead husband had signed in December 2011. She opened the door when Elena knocked and looked at her daughter for a moment, and then stepped back to let her in. Coffee was already made. They sat at the kitchen table with their cups between their hands and didn't for a while, which was becoming a language between them. All these silences that said the things the words couldn't manage yet. Then Elena said, "Tell me about him. The parts you didn't tell me before." Her mother understood immediately. She didn't deflect or minimize. She sat with the question for about 30 seconds, and then she started talking about Paul Marlowe, the way people talk about the dead when they finally stop protecting you from them. Honestly, incompletely, the real version rather than the memorial version. He had been a smart man and a frightened one, and his fear had been the kind that was invisible from the outside, because he'd learned to cover it with competence. He had loved his family genuinely and had made a decision that endangered them out of a desire to protect them, which was the specific kind of tragedy that didn't resolve itself into anything clean. He had not been a bad man. He had been a man who made a terrible choice and spent 3 years trying to undo it and ran out of time. "I'm angry at him," Elena said. "I know. I've been angry at him for 2 days. Can't figure out if that's fair." "Probably it's both," her mother said. "Fair and unfair at the same time. That's usually how it goes with people you love." Elena turned her coffee cup in her hands. "The accounts. Victor had you on an account as registered agent." "I knew," her mother said. "About 2 of them. I didn't know the third until you told me. The immunity covers all 3. Dines confirmed it last night." She looked up. "You're clear. Legally. Completely." Her mother closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was something in her face that was not quite relief, because relief implies that the fear had a clean end. And this fear had been with her for 15 years, and had become structural, part of the load-bearing walls of her daily life. Removing it didn't make the space immediately livable. It just made it possible, eventually, to rebuild. "Thank you," her mother said. "I didn't do it for you specifically," Elena said. "I did it because it needed doing." She paused. "That's not as cold as it sounds." "I know exactly how it sounds," her mother said. "It sounds like me." They sat with that for a moment, and then Elena's mother got up and brought a plate of things to eat that neither of them had particularly asked for and set it between them on the table. And they ate, and the morning moved slowly around them, the way Saturday mornings do when they are not required to be anything in particular. She did not see Adrian for 11 days. That was not by accident. It was a decision she made on the Saturday morning while sitting at her mother's table, not announced to anyone. just a private calibration. She needed 11 days of being herself, without the gravitational pull of the situation they'd been inside, without the wire and the photographs and the necessity of reading his face for information she needed to survive. She needed to know what she thought about him, when survival was not the immediate question. Called twice. She texted back both times. Brief, civil messages that said nothing except that she was all right and that she needed time. He responded to both with a single word, okay, which was, she thought, the right response, which was him demonstrating something she needed to see demonstrated before she could evaluate anything else about him. The nonprofit work resumed on Monday. There was a stack of case files on her desk that had accumulated over the past 5 days of emergency, and she went through them with the focus of someone who has been reminded recently, and at some cost, why the work matters. 2 of the cases were complex. One required a court appearance she spent most of Tuesday preparing for. She won it, technically, in the sense that the client's protective order was extended and the terms strengthened, which was not a victory the way people used the word in movies, but was a real and material improvement in a real person's actual life, which was the only kind of winning that held up over time. Dines called on the 4th day with a case update. The charging document had been formally filed. Victor's attorneys had entered a not guilty plea, which was expected and procedural, and meant nothing except that the next phase was beginning. The financial records Elena had photographed had been formally entered into evidence. Iris Lamb had given a second expanded statement. Calder had agreed to formal cooperation. The attorneys were describing the evidentiary position as strong, which was the strongest language they used. Kern, Elena asked. Kern is talking, Dine said. He's angry, which is useful. People who are angry testify clearly. And Munn took a deal. He's cooperating on the Pilsen operation specifically. His testimony on the agents a pause. The agents were relocated, not harmed. Victor wanted to create the appearance of something worse. Munn moved them to a location in Indiana and left them there. They're both fine. Elena let out a breath she'd been holding since Dines had first said, officer down situation in that stairwell phone call. Good. Yes, Dines said, it is. She paused. Ms. Marlowe, what you did the wire, the restaurant, the photographs. You should know that the restaurant recording was the cleanest piece of evidence we have. His own words. His own admission about the car outside Torres's address. His own offer of the document fraud. Another pause. Nerve. It took necessity, Elena said. They're not the same thing. No, Dine said. But they produce the same results sometimes. She went to the North Shore house on the 9th day. She drove there alone in the early afternoon, parked in the same place she'd parked when she came to take the photographs, and walked up to the front door. She didn't have a key anymore. She'd given Adrian's copy back to him in the parking lot outside the restaurant, a small exchange that had happened silently and meant more than the object. But Mrs. Farrow was there, and Mrs. Farrow let her in. He said, you might come, Mrs. Farrow told her. No judgment in it. Information. Is anything different up there? Elena asked. She meant the study. I took the book, Mrs. Farrow said, like he asked. Put it in my room. Nobody came for it. You can get rid of it, Elena said. However you like. Mrs. Farrow nodded, once. The nod of a woman who had worked in this house long enough to know that some things were better disposed of without ceremony. Elena went upstairs. The study looked smaller in daylight, without the urgency of what she'd been doing in it 11 days ago. She stood in the doorway and looked at the desk, and the shelf of books, and the lamp, all of it ordinary now, just a room a man had used to work in, when he needed to work somewhere, his father couldn't walk into. She understood that differently now than she had 10 days ago. She understood it as the action of a person trying to hold something private in a life that had never permitted privacy. She didn't go to the drawer. The ring was still in it, probably. She left it there. It wasn't hers to remove. She went back downstairs, thanked Mrs. Farrow, drove back to the city. On the 10th day, she cleaned her apartment in the particular way she cleaned when she was processing something thoroughly, room by room, moving furniture slightly to sweep under it, washing things that didn't strictly need washing. She found on the save-the-date card under a stack of mail on her kitchen counter, one that had been returned to center and arrived back in her mailbox last week. She held it for a moment, her name and Adrian's name on the same line, in the same font, the way names look before you know what they're going to cost each other. Put it in the recycling. On the 11th day, he came to her office. Not her apartment. Her office, which was the correct choice, which meant he'd thought about it. He knocked on the open door at 4 in the afternoon, while she was finishing a case note, and she looked up, and he was standing in the doorway in a coat she hadn't seen before. No bruise now, cut above his brow, healed to a thin line that would probably scar slightly, and he looked like himself, which was a complicated thing to look like when you weren't entirely sure who that was yet. "I have something to tell you," he said. She put down her pen. "Come in." He came in. He didn't sit. He stood near the window, which was his habit. Adrian Voss in any room always positioned himself near the exit or the window, the instinct of someone raised in spaces where the door could close on you. She'd always read it as restlessness. She understood it differently now. "I'm surrendering the estate," he said. "The North Shore house, the downtown holdings, the investment accounts that aren't frozen. Everything that came from the organization, directly or indirectly." He looked at her steadily. "My attorneys are working with the federal office on the disposition. Most of it will go toward restitution for the people in that ledger who are still alive to receive it. The rest to a victim compensation structure Rourke is setting up." Elena looked at him. "That's everything you have." "I have money I earned myself. Enough to start," he paused. "I'm also talking to Rourke about identity documentation. A new name. Not hiding everything will be public record. My cooperation, my testimony, all of it. The Voss name is—" He stopped. "It's not something I want to carry forward. It's not something I want to build anything under." "What name?" she said. "I haven't decided. Something that doesn't mean anything yet." He looked at his hands briefly and then back at her. "I'm going to be a different kind of person. I know that sounds like something people say and don't mean. I know I don't get credit for saying it. I only get credit for doing it, and that takes time you haven't agreed to give me." "No," she said, "I haven't." "I know." She folded her hands on the desk. "The Munn situation. You gave a compromised contact information that got Kern taken. You gave a witness my name as an emergency contact without my knowledge. You knew my father's name before we met, and you spent 14 months deciding whether to tell me." She said it evenly, not as an accusation anymore, just as a record. "Those things happened. They don't unhappen because you gave up the estate. I know that too. I'm not done being angry about them. I know. And I'm not going to tell you today whether there's something on the other side of the anger, because I genuinely don't know yet, and telling you something I don't know yet is how my father operated, and I've decided not to do that." Something moved through his face at the mention of her father, not flinching. Something quieter than that. "That's fair," he said. "What it is," she said, "is honest." He nodded. He picked up his coat from where he'd laid it on the chair. He was going, which was also the correct reading of the room. "I'm in the city for another few weeks while the legal process moves. After that." He made a small gesture. "I don't know yet." "Let me know when you do," she said. "Not immediately, but let me know." He looked at her across the desk. The afternoon light was coming through the window beside him, and it fell across half his face and left the other half in shadow, which was not a metaphor she was going to belabor, but which was accurate in the way things sometimes are. "Okay," said he, left. She sat at her desk for a few minutes after she heard the outer door close, not doing anything particular, just sitting. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did, moving, absorbing, processing its own ongoing business with the complete indifference of something very large and very old. She had lived in this city her whole life, and it had never once waited for her to finish anything before continuing, which she had always found both irritating and deeply correct. She picked up her pen and finished the case note. The months that followed moved at the pace that months move at, when nothing extraordinary is happening, which is both slower and faster than months, with emergencies in them. Elena's work expanded, not dramatically, but steadily she brought on a second attorney to the nonprofit and opened a second case track for financial exploitation victims, which was a category she had not previously focused on, and which turned out, as she had perhaps suspected it would, to be substantial in ways the existing system was not adequately addressing. Her mother came to the office twice a month for lunch. They did not talk about Paul Marlowe at every lunch, or even most lunches. They talked about him honestly when it came up, which was different from before. And the difference was the thing that mattered. Her mother was slowly, something Elena hadn't seen her be in a long time, not lighter exactly, because the weight didn't disappear, but more accurately distributed, carrying it more honestly in the places it actually needed to be carried, rather than hiding it in places that weren't built for it. Victor Voss's trial was set for the following spring. The federal case was large enough and complex enough that the pretrial process alone would take months, which was the institutional pace of things this size, and Elena had made her peace with it. She was listed as a witness for the prosecution. She was not listed as a victim, which was a legal determination she privately disagreed with and publicly accepted. Because sometimes the category you're placed in by a system isn't the one that feels true to you, and you deal with it anyway. Iris Lamb started a new job at an accounting firm in Lincoln Park and sent Elena an email in December that was 2 paragraphs long and ended with, "I don't know if thank you is the right word for what I owe you, but I'm going to use it anyway." Elena wrote back a single sentence. "You kept the records." That's the thing that mattered. Russell Calder went home to a new address in a different city and did not contact anyone from his previous life, which was both his right and, Elena thought, probably the healthiest choice available to him. David Kern testified before a federal grand jury in November and was described by Rourke afterward as precisely as angry as anticipated, which meant the testimony had been clear and detailed and useful in exactly the way angry testimony is. Garrett Munn received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation and was transferred to a facility in Wisconsin where, as far as Elena knew, he remained. She heard from Adrian in February. Call. A letter, actual paper, handwritten, delivered to her office address. The handwriting was his, which she recognized from grocery lists and post-it notes on coffee makers. And the letter was 3 pages long and said the things that letters say when the person writing them has had several months to decide what actually needed to be said versus what they merely wanted to say, and has done the work of sorting between them. He was in Portland. He had taken a position with an urban planning nonprofit, entry-level, doing work he was overqualified for in terms of experience and underqualified for in terms of the specific kind of knowledge that comes from doing something honest for its own sake. He was building that knowledge. He said it was harder than anything he had done before, which was a specific kind of hard he had not expected and was grateful for. He had a new name. He mentioned it once, briefly, not asking her to use it, just placing it in the letter as information. She read it and read it again, and thought about a man who had decided that the name he'd been born into was something he could actually choose to put down, like a stone you've been carrying since childhood that you finally understand you were never required to carry in the first place. The last paragraph said, "I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm writing because I think you deserve to know where I ended up, and because the honest version of who I'm trying to become includes not disappearing from people I owe an accounting to. You're one of those people. This is the accounting." She read the letter twice. Then she put it in a drawer, not the filing drawer, not the recycling, a different one, and sat for a while, looking at the February light on her office wall. She wrote back 3 weeks later. Her letter was shorter than his, 1 page, and it said what she knew and not what she didn't. It said that she was glad he was in Portland doing honest work, and that she hoped it continued. It said that the anger had not fully resolved, but had settled into something more like a scar, which was different from a wound, functional, permanent, present, not debilitating. It said that her mother was well and that the case was moving, and that she had started a second track at the nonprofit that was harder and more necessary than she'd expected. The last thing she wrote was, "You were right that the truth nearly destroyed our future. You were also right about the other part." She sent it before she could reconsider the last line. In March, on a Tuesday, she walked past her apartment closet and noticed the garment bag still hanging inside it. She'd been walking past it for 5 months. She unzipped it, took out the dress, held it for a moment. It was a good dress. That had never been the problem with it. She called a consignment shop on Wednesday and donated it. The woman at the counter said it was beautiful and asked if she'd worn it. Elena said no. The woman said what a shame. Elena said she wasn't sure it was. She drove home in the March cold with the windows down a little, the way you do when you need the air to be real against your face. And she thought about a chess game when she was 8, and her father not letting her win, and how she had understood that eventually, as the most loving thing he knew how to do, refusing to make her smaller by giving her a victory she hadn't earned. She thought about what she had earned in the past 5 months and what she hadn't, and what the difference between those two categories looked like going forward. She thought about her mother at a kitchen table, saying that's usually how it goes with people you love, and about Iris Lamb's 2-paragraph email, and about a letter from Portland that used the word. Accounting as though it were a gift instead of a burden. She stopped at a light on Clark Street. A couple was crossing in front of her, older, maybe 70s, walking slowly, with the ease of people who have been walking beside each other for long enough that they no longer need to coordinate it. They were not holding hands. They were just walking. close enough that if one of them stumbled, the other would catch it without having to think. The light changed. Elena drove home. The apartment was quiet. The way apartments are quiet on weekday evenings when you live alone, and have made a decision to be all right with that, for as long as it takes to know what you actually want. She made dinner without much ceremony, something simple, something warm. She ate at the kitchen table without her phone. She washed the dishes and dried them and put them away. Then she sat on the kitchen floor, which was something she still did sometimes on hard days, and was beginning to do less on ordinary ones, not because the floor had stopped being useful, but because fewer days required it. She sat there for a few minutes. The tile was cool. The apartment was quiet. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always did. She had her work, and her mother's number in her phone, and a letter in a drawer from a man in Portland who was trying to become something he'd been too afraid to be, and a scar that was still present but was no longer in the front room. She got up off the floor. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed.